So this is a video that's been in the works for a while. I kept trying to make it a special event, specifically a 4th of July release, but it just never ended up happening. So I thought screw it, and just decided to do this now instead of trying to get fancy with it. It's time, boys and girls. It's time to examine a dead body.
Death at the gates again. Howl in my name. Can't greet you today. I have a war to win.
Es gibt ein Haus in Neu-Berlin, man nennt es Haus Abendrot. Es war der Ruin vieler guter Jungs, und von mir, mein Gott, litt ich Not.
General, before the day is done, I will have you at the end of my blade and force your surrender.
Den Rest meiner Tage bleib ich dort bei dem Haus Abendrot.
This is a rabbit hole and a half, to put it as lightly as humanly possible. So Wolfenstein is a massive franchise going on over 40 years at this point. Hell, it really doesn't even need that much of an introduction due to how famous it really is in gaming, serving as one of the foundational blocks to the first-person shooter genre. I mean, everyone knows Wolfenstein 3D, id Software, and their golden son that spawned in the form of Doom. Now, Wolfenstein actually existed before the iconic FPS game, first existing as Castle Wolfenstein all the way back in 1981, then as Beyond Castle Wolfenstein in 84. But even back then, even though they were just little Atari DOS games, they were able to advance technology forward in surprising ways. It's widely considered to be one of the first games that had actual text boxes for speech and had elements of stealth in the gameplay. Super primitive on both fronts, of course, but they were there. But everyone considers Wolf 3D to be the starting point, as it's the one that impacted the direction of the franchise the most, and it's referenced countless times in gaming. It's said that Castle Wolfenstein and Beyond are just sort of forgotten, but it is what it is. It comes with age. Still, Wolfenstein from the get-go had a very unique identity to it. The story to both Castle Wolfenstein and Wolf 3D focused around an American soldier infiltrating a supposedly impenetrable fortress, the eponymous Castle Wolfenstein. Taking influence from films like The Guns of Navarone and Where Eagles Dare, the idea was to make a very pulpy, fun adventure movie. The protagonist, William B.J. Blazkowicz, was meant to be the typical all-American man. Chiseled jaw, patriotic demeanor, hell, some interpretations would paint him as a good old southern boy, just to push it as hard as possible. The point is that BJ is meant to be a simple, fun character. The hero you'd see on classic action movie posters. I mean, hell, that was the cover of some of the games, which is the vibe Wolfenstein wanted to push from the beginning. Other franchises like Metal Gear would delve deeper into the morality of war and conflict, acknowledging both sides are human beings, just conflicting ideals, to show that nothing is ever black and white. But Wolfenstein never worried about any of that. You shoot at Mecha Hitler at the end of Wolf 3D. These games are meant to be fun. And this franchise has come to life on more than a few occasions. It has more of a pulse than Doom, its son. Doom doesn't always rise from the grave, but when it does, it ends up rising like a fucking undead king and completely changes the landscape of gaming forever. Doom 1 and 2 warped the direction of the industry and kicked off the first-person shooter boom that downright changed history. Wolfenstein, though, has always had more of a tempo, dripping releases every few years. And honestly, it mainly just serves to set the stage for whenever Doom wants to come back into the spotlight. Wolf 3D was great, but then Doom flooded the earth. Return to Castle Wolfenstein was fucking awesome, then it was quickly overshadowed by Doom 3. And then you have the subject of this video, the Reboot Trilogy. So as stated, Wolfenstein never really died per se. Even without major releases coming every year, there were plenty of spin-offs that kept the IP going. From Wolfenstein RPG to the standalone multiplayer Enemy Territory, you even had a previous attempt at a reboot in 2009 just called Wolfenstein, that you legally can't buy anywhere now because of rights issues between Bethesda and Activision. I love modern gaming. I love modern gaming. I love modern gaming. Still, you get the point. Wolfenstein never truly died. In fact, it was still kicking around until very recently. But after the middling reception of the 2009 game, it went dormant for about 5 years, until the launch of the next generation of consoles, the PS4 and Xbox One. Then, out of the blue, it revealed the next step in the series. So for a large chunk of Wolfenstein, the story is revolved around BJ fighting the Nazis in the midst of World War II. He's infiltrating various bases and castles that belong to higher-up officials in Hitler's army, usually uncovering investigations into the occult. Yeah, the series leaned hard to Himmler's occult division aspect of the war. The games get very fantastical. Return to Castle Wolfenstein goes fucking fucking insane towards the end, with BJ fighting cyber-Nazi soldiers, mutants, outright demons. 2009 Wolfenstein outright full-blown goes Lovecraftian, revealing a parallel dimension to humanity known as the Black Sun. Wolfenstein 3D doesn't get too insane beyond robots and mechs. Every game has their line to what they wanted to do and focus on, and they help give each game a distinct vibe. And the timeline and how they're all connected is hazy. 2009 is treated as non-canon because, as stated, rights issues, and Wolf 3D is referenced but not really ever treated seriously. Castle Wolfenstein Beyond basically don't exist. If you're really trying to line up the games in a big timeline, you'll have a hell of a time trying to make it all work with Wolfenstein, especially as the games go on and start contradicting elements and rebooting details hard. It especially doesn't help that the series has changed hands numerous times over its lifespan, from Muse Software to Apogee to even Activision and EA, but now it's snugly in the hands of Bethesda and id. So on top of different reboots and sequels, you've had different companies that either didn't want or couldn't cover certain details the other games did. Now the actual developers behind the reboot games is Machine Games, made up of former members of Starbreeze. God, remember Starbreeze? I miss them so fucking much. The Reboot trilogy only really treats Return to Castle Wolfenstein as canon, sort of, since BJ makes direct references to events that happen in that game and characters from it return for the story. 2014 game, The New Order, serves as a sort of spiritual reboot or legacy sequel. It's basically a full-blown remake, and you don't need larger context for it all to work, but a fan would enjoy all the member berries and callbacks to the earlier franchise. And the idea is to push the series out of World War II to a dystopian alternate history instead. You see, the Reboot trilogy took influence from stuff like Man in the High Castle and Fatherland, showing Nazi Germany win the war and utterly dominate the world. Their efforts to gain supernatural artifacts and weaponize them worked, and they were able to outpace the Allies with their newfound power, accelerating their technological development and building an army of super soldiers. Despite BJ's efforts to cripple the war machine, it was still able to completely steamroll everyone. There's a lot of emphasis in the New Order to show how powerful the Nazis have become. The intro of the game is a sort of warped version of the invasion of Normandy. The actual event itself is referenced as happening, but this is, as stated, kind of its own thing to introduce the game. But instead, it's a raid on the compound to General Death's Head, or Totenkampf. He's the lead scientist from Return to Castle Wolfenstein that's able to escape before BJ can kill him. New Order uses him as the central antagonist, a completely sadistic madman who views other human beings as machines he can take apart and experiment on at a whim. But in spite of his sheer evil, he's a brilliant scientist that spearheads the Nazi army and allows them to curb stomp their enemies. BJ feels a personal responsibility for not killing him before, and it's his duty to right this wrong, especially as he sees the utter slaughter the invasion ends up being. The Allies are torn to pieces by the more advanced weaponry and machinery the Nazis have to throw at them. New Order really excels at selling its premise to you right from the get-go. It barely takes any time for you to sink into the new world and the new cast. BJ in earlier games was meant to be a relatively thin character. He's a player insert you slip into to have the power fantasy being a complete badass. The Reboot trilogy tries a different angle with him. He's still a complete badass, but now BJ is more tired and is basically a damaged version of himself. He's still utterly dedicated to the cause of ending the war and toppling the Nazis, but you see that deep down the guy is traumatized, bordering on mentally unstable. He talks to himself numerous times in the game, commenting on the situation and various people he meets throughout his adventure. Sometimes it can be slight quips to outright poetic descriptions of the horror around him.
And they grieve for their dead. Such raw sorrow. Can't partake. Mine would flood oceans. It would drown me if I let it out.
Brian Bloom is a really good voice actor for BJ, by the way. Dude is fantastic in the role, even if the later games have their problems. BJ is a complicated guy. He has zero desire to stop or really has any doubts about what he's doing, taking that one-man army style trope we're used to in FPS games and showing that a guy like that in real life would be pretty depressing. He's so driven to destroy the Nazis, you genuinely start to wonder what he's going to do once it's all over. Can he even do this? There's countless references in the New Order to the sheer power the Nazis have. They control the entire planet and then some. They have technology that should be impossible to exist, and they have a near infinite-sized army at their disposal. New Order is a dystopia story, and it feels completely authentic to the vibe they wanted to sell. There's a cat-and-mouse game between BJ and the Nazis at all times. Some moments, BJ is able to single-handedly clear an entire building like a fucking Terminator. Other times, he has to sneak around and evade pursuers. There's a lot of thought put into each sequence that help keep the story exciting, even with his arsenal of weapons. A callback to the classic game instead of the artificial weapon limits that were standard to the industry. The guy is up against a powerful enemy that will kill him quick if he gets stupid. I think the best thing that New Order does is make you genuinely invested in the story. Games like Doom are mindless bloodbaths that don't give two shits about the actual plots. They're dumb fun and everyone knows it. The fun is how over the top they can get. Hell, the older Wolfenstein games did exactly this too. You weren't really expected to care about what's going on in return, just turn your brain off and enjoy the shootouts. But New Order decided to sit down and truly make you care about what's happening, and the way it does it is something that should really be lauded. The best way to describe the tone of New Order is matter of fact. The game goes out of its way to have such a direct method to the storytelling. Characters are fast to get to the point in every conversation. The Nazis waste zero time making themselves a despicable enemy faction you want to see BJ take down, and the story doesn't waste any time with filler missions beyond maybe 1 or 2 incidents. There's not a lot of fat to the story, which is what makes it so easy to sink into. It doesn't waste time on melodrama or cheap attempts at tension. It doesn't insult your intelligence. Instead, it just gives you a plot and character as they are. Whether or not you care is up to you. Even the horror sequences have a creepy, methodical feel to them. To the player, it's nightmarish. To the Nazis, it's business as usual, which is especially effective in a story intended to be a dystopia. You see this absolute empire stomping on human rights and hurting characters you've grown to enjoy, so you're invested in fighting back against them. New Order has a lot of standout moments to it. Hell, it's even capable of being genuinely emotional. There are people who have cried at a few scenes to a fucking Wolfenstein game. If you travel back in time and told that to somebody in 2005, they'd smack you upside the head. The idea that a reboot to a classic FPS series with old school gameplay complete with open levels, collectibles, and a big arsenal of guns, and having that have a story capable of making audiences emotional, that's insane. Still, New Order has a lot to it. It's a solid 10 to 15 hour long game that encourages exploration and wants you to dig deeper to find details about this new setting they came up with. It is a very fleshed out dystopia, explaining just how badly the rest of the world lost against the Nazis. As stated, the invasion of Normandy happened in canon, and the Allies lost over 156,000 soldiers during the invasion, and the Germans only lost 89 men. It's possible this is just propaganda since you read about it in a German newspaper in Old Blood, but honestly, the world they build up leans into it probably being more real than fake. You also see how Japan was betrayed by Germany, helping the Chinese win the Sino-Japanese War, then immediately betraying China and conquering both after they were weakened from the mutual fighting. America was occupied after New York was hit with a fucking atom bomb, which New Colossus actually lets you walk around in the ruins. There's a really cool dystopia here. Pure diesel punk-styled cyber-Nazis that feel like a real threat. Part of what makes New Order so compelling is the fact that Nazis feel like an opponent that's impossible to win against. BJ is throwing himself at a wall over and over again, and you start doubting if it's possible long before he does. Not just from story concepts either. The look of the world just feels brutal and oppressive. The soldiers are covered head to toe in metal armor, their guns feel powerful, since the weapons used in the game are just stolen Nazi guns. Each one kicks like a mule, and even something as simple as the pistol is capable of killing entire levels of enemies if you're smart about it. You're encouraged to use each gun in different ways for different situations. The assault rifle is the workhorse weapon, having good damage that can keep pace with most every enemy, even getting a rocket launcher upgrade that can chew through armor of larger enemies. The pistol, as stated, is another viable gun, having a burst fire mode that eats through ammo, yet can take out lighter enemies reliably. It gets a silencer upgrade that is essential for stealth playthroughs since headshots are instant kills that don't alert other enemies. The shotgun, though, is a tad wonky. On paper, it's great for crowd control, especially with its upgrade that gives it ricochet flash hits that can absolutely devastate enemies in the right conditions. But that's kind of the problem. You need to find the time and place to use the flash hits, and the normal mode for the shotgun is only really good for choke points, something that restricts enemies and doesn't give them a lot of room to maneuver, because wider spaces give the shotgun problems. You can solve this by getting up close, but it feels a little too close, and higher difficulties punish riskier moves than that. As much as New Colossus has problems, and we're going to talk about that, they fixed their shotgun. A little too much, honestly, but we'll get to that later. The marksman rifle is an interesting one, since it's basically 2 weapons in one. You have the semi-automatic mode, where it's a sort of kind of sniper rifle, though you don't really get much range for it. And then you unlock the upgrade for it that turns it into a laser rifle, allowing you to pick up bad guys from a distance, then swap to the laser to melt through the armor for heavier enemies, which is absolutely devastating when you dual wield them. Also, you have the grenades, a sorta kinda EMP grenade that's good for paralyzing robot enemies, yet also acts as a standard grenade for goons. Once again, they can be a tad contextual. If you want to use the EMP feature reliably, you can end up fighting with the more agile robots a bit more than comfortable, but if you use them as standard grenades, they do their job. The final weapon is the laser. So early in the game, BJ receives a laser cutter weapon that can act as just a tool, slicing through chains or metal crates to get access to new areas or resources. More often than not, you're using it to get extra health and armor, but it has an alternate firing mode, acting like a smaller pistol that doesn't use ammo. Instead, you charge it up with various charging stations around each level. You can also charge the laser rifle this way too. See, later in the game, the laser cutter is replaced with the laser Kraftwerk, which is a sort of super weapon for the game. It's essentially a beefier laser rifle that can insta-kill enemies. Not only kill them, but make most every enemy explode into piles of gore. Even stronger enemies can be taken down quick by just the regular fire. The catch is that the battery isn't very big, and the gun gets multiple upgrades that changes its behavior, starting off as a basic laser gun, and ending as sort of a charging death beam that can kill multiple enemies simultaneously or outright insta-killing mini-bosses. The gun is one that's easy to forget about for something like the assault rifle, but if you know when to use it, the thing can be extremely helpful. The last few weapons are a tad gimmicky. You get earlier versions of the weapons during the intro, 1946 version of the rifle, a double-barreled shotgun, so on. These are focused on more in Old Blood, since that takes place before the dystopia, but New Order features them for the intro levels. There's also the heavy weapons, aka the turrets you can rip off and wield as a weapon for a bit. The laser turret and the regular heavy machine gun. They do their job as room clearers, but they're also riskier, since you move slower and can easily be outflanked or overpowered if you start your rampage at the wrong time. Save them from when you know you can wipe out all life instead of just to look cool. Higher difficulties especially punish this. Now the final weapon are the knives. BJ has a combat knife that he uses for stealth takedowns or to throw at enemies for long range kills. They can act as a sort of replacement for the pistol in case you didn't find the silencer upgrade or don't have a pistol on you for a level. They're a bit more unreliable though, since they're thrown at an arc and can be interrupted mid-air instead of just a quick bullet to the head like a pistol. They're absolutely devastating since they make enemies drop like ragdolls as soon as they're hit by one, but there's just more risk to them. The stealth takedown is an interesting aspect to the knives since they're quick and pretty grisly. BJ just shoves the knives inside the enemy, usually targeting the head or a place with an artery. He's downright ruthless with it. There's even contextual takedowns where you get unique animations based on what the enemy's doing, but it's obvious that these are basically kind of scripted. They're very rare and telegraphed from a mile away. Still, they're cool.
Wake up, you're dead.
Now the actual gameplay of New Order is interesting. It plays like a mixture of typical FPS game and something more old school. You get these open levels that want you to peek around corners for resources and upgrades, but the moment-to-moment gunplay is more reminiscent to modern FPS, emphasizing cover and picking when to peek out and kill an enemy. There's even a lean system that will allow you to be a bit more agile with how you want to peek out, getting different angles on enemies, making sure you're more in cover than out. It's pretty good and lets you feel like you have more control during a fight. Enemy AI feels responsive. Can't say it's anything as advanced as Fear, but they feel like an actual enemy. It never broke down or acted brain dead. Each type has their role and they feel like they mesh well together. Heavier enemies like super soldiers and shotgunners are very aggressive, advancing forward and keeping you on the back foot, and they also have tons of armor so they can soak up shots. Meanwhile, more standard goons try to find positions to pin you down, even tossing grenades to flush you out if you're in one place for too long. Dogs just rush straight for you, locking you into a melee animation that leaves you exposed to other enemies, since you aren't immune doing this, making you focus on dogs before anything else. As stated, none of this is revolutionary or anything you haven't seen before, but New Order is able to mesh all the enemy types together in a way that makes combat flow very well. You're able to get into a rhythm with the game and start planning how to get out of every shootout, what enemies to focus on, what areas might spawn what enemies, whether to grab a piece of armor now or wait when heavier guys come into the arena. New Order has a lot of thought put into the gameplay. Even if you play on higher difficulties that kick your teeth in, it never really feels like the game is unfair. A lot like Doom 2016 and Eternal's difficulties, where the higher scaled ones feel like a genuine challenge instead of just buffering enemy health and damage. And much like the Reboot Doom games, there's a list of upgrades you can find that buff up BJ. You have the weapon and health upgrades, which I talked about earlier, but you also have a menu of perks that can change things up as well. Perks are essentially gameplay challenges that you can complete that will unlock a new buff, whether it be a larger magazine for your guns, holding more grenades, or unlocking the ability to leech health off an enemy when you go for a takedown, and the progress for each challenge saves between resets, so if you reach a perfect spot that will let you grind up some challenges, don't be afraid to purposely die a few times to grind them up. You really feel the difference when you unlock more and more of them. Perks aren't anything you build around, you're expected to unlock all of them by the end. And this is something we'll talk about come New Colossus, because they changed this system up. There's even a mechanic that encourages you to replay the game, though that involves story spoilers. It's a little weird to do this for a 10-year-old game, but fuck it, here's a spoiler warning for the New Order. It's a genuinely good story that I want you guys to experience yourselves. You can get the game pretty dirt cheap now, so give it a shot for going any further. You won't regret it.
Okay, you put a Nazi on the moon. Fuck you, moon.
Alright, so I already explained that the intro of the game is a sorta kind of invasion of Normandy situation. As a last Hail Mary, the Allies launch a full-scale assault on Death's Head compound, hoping to kill him and cripple the Nazis' technological development, maybe even getting the chance to figure out the secrets themselves and get a stronger foothold against the Nazis. Unfortunately, the whole mission is a disaster. The troop transport planes are torn to pieces before ever reaching the island. Blazkowicz and his team barely survived the landing themselves. It's him, Wing Commander Fergus Reed, and Private Wyatt. There's others too, but they're complete jobbers who die very quickly. Fergus is an experienced member of the Royal Air Force, a cynical Scotsman who has a no-bullshit attitude and is quick to bark orders at others, though he's unafraid of sarcasm when he thinks the situation calls for it. By contrast, Wyatt is much more skittish and meek. The guy hasn't had the chance to become more of a fighter like BJ and Fergus. He's essentially the new guy. He rattles easily and panics under pressure on a few occasions, but you do see his potential, coming up with a few ideas to get past blockages and even saving BJ's life from one of the robot dogs. You're given two vastly different men who are essentially polar opposites, and this plays into how the intro ends. The team ends up fighting their way through the castle and reach the labs for Death's Head. Unfortunately, it was a trap, and what's left of the men are captured. Death's Head recognizes BJ, and as a sick form of revenge, he demands that he choose one of the two men to be dissected for his experiments. You can try and not pick either, but they just end up killing everybody. You have to choose between Fergus or Wyatt. This is a part of the timeline system the game has. Each men will unlock a different minigame and upgrade you can receive in your playthrough. If you pick Wyatt, you have a lockpicking minigame and unlock armor upgrades. If you pick Fergus, you get a hotwire minigame and health upgrades. Gameplay-wise, the differences aren't too massive. You do get alternate paths you can go down for each level, but they aren't really extensive. The real point of them are the upgrades and the alternate cutscenes. You can even play a sort of New Game Plus with the same save file, where you go through the intro again and pick the opposite timeline, so you still have all the upgrades from the last playthrough and you snatch all the health and armor ones you couldn't get before. Now, the cutscene changes are interesting. They aren't major, you go through the same story no matter what, but there's a difference in dialogue and you even get different side characters depending on the route. The Wyatt route gives you Jay, a disfigured black guitarist who likes doping up on LSD and seems like a hippie straight out of the 1960s. I wonder who he's supposed to be. Yeah, they're not shy about implying that he's Jimi Hendrix. I've convinced the reason his face is messed up is so that he wouldn't have to deal with securing the rights to his likeness, but every other conversation screams it in your ear, and you get some of the funnier moments of the game with him, alongside a moment that's pretty intense, since him and Blasco get into a heated argument, Jay talking about how Jim Crow-era America made him already feel oppressed, and Blasco being genuinely insulted at the assertion that they were anything like the Nazis.
Your fight. You took your orders from the man. The U.S. motherfucking government, man. What a trip. The war came and the man came calling. He sent my daddy to war and he did not return him. The bombs fell on our great cities and the man ran scared. Motherfucking gave up, you know? Nazis asked him to get down on his knees and the man was all too happy just to pucker up and start kissing Nazi ass like it was the most natural thing in the world, you know? I had to cross an ocean to get away from that place. They would throw me in the gas chamber just like they did all the others.
None of that has anything to do with me. That's not the America I fought for.
Really? I was little. My mother wanted to take me to the picture show, but we had to go in through the fucking colored entrance. I wanted a hot dog and a lemonade, but the sign says we don't serve Negroes in this establishment. You're a patriot. Blue-eyed, jarhead, motherfucking Nazi-killing patriot that you are, you're still a fucking puppet to the man. You're exactly the kind of guy they ordered in come lynching time. You don't get it, do you? Before all this, before the Germans, before the war, back home, man, you were the Nazis.
Be careful what you call me.
Violence. Language of the man. Can't you see? We're all just brothers and sisters now, aren't we?
The argument's short and brief, and the two men quickly put aside their differences and realize how pig-headed both of them were, aka the exact thing New Colossus would never do. We'll get into that later, however, just know that it's going to be painful. Fergus' route gives you Tekla, a mentally unstable mathematician who believes all of existence can be broken down into formulas and patterns. Free will does not exist, and they are slaves to whatever force controls them. She classes with the much more traditional Blasco, who believes in spirituality and God, a more grounded man, and a woman who gets too deep into her own head.
Let me ask you something. He will not understand. Where do you go when you lose consciousness? Why even bother?
What?
Surprise, surprise. You have a brain. The brain is a biological computational device running an electrochemical process. Your consciousness is an emergent property of said process. blank face like that of a baby. In other words, you are your electrochemical process. Fundamentally, you have the experience of a continuous existence. You are you at this point in time, the same you as you were in the past, and you have a sensation of riding along this continuum of being you into the future. Do you follow me? Doesn't look like it. Continuing. On occasion, the brain may be subjected to trauma, temporarily discontinuing the electrochemical process, such as a boxer being knocked out. As this occurs, the brain is no longer running its electrochemical consciousness generating process. Hence, consciousness is lost. You lose consciousness. Pay attention now. At this point in time, your consciousness, all that is you, your continuum of being you, has ceased to exist in the physical world. Now, moments later, the electrochemical process may start up again, allowing consciousness to emerge out of the information stored in the brain. But I wonder, where are you in the meantime? No, it's too stupid. Must we not assume that at the point when consciousness is lost, the person dies? If a new consciousness appears or not in the same brain is entirely inconsequential to the dead consciousness. The new consciousness is simply a new person. Because it emerges from the same brain, it has access to all the memories and cognitive structures as a dead consciousness, so it thinks it is the same person, but in actuality, it is just an imposter, inheriting the body and brain from the previous, now dead inhabitants. Yes, like talking to a child.
What about the soul?
Soul. I knew he was stupid. There's no such thing as a soul. We are machines of biology, nothing more, nothing less. Idiot! The soul, simply a pointless concept dreamt up by priests and fairy tale men. You're an anomaly, you. An outlier. Useless. A laughing anus is what you are.
Despite the stark contrast, the two bond over their differences, and Tekla considers him to be a real friend. Both side characters are memorable, and it really just comes down to who you think clicked with you more. Some people love the Wyatt route purely because getting to drop acid with Jimi Hendrix is too cool to pass up. Others like Tekla because they enjoy her friendship with Blazkowicz and feel sympathetic towards her. It's a personal preference thing, which is the biggest compliment you can give them. They're both good characters, it just comes down to who you like more. All around, New Order's characters are all very interesting and likable. You even get to see Caroline again from Wolfenstein 2009, the one element from that game they were probably able to reference. She's a paraplegic after the fake-out death at the end of that game, and she now leads what's left of the Kreisau Circle, the underground resistance movement fighting against the Nazis. Each member of the group all feel very human, and they're all compelling to watch. There's a good tempo to the dialogue. Every cutscene is fast-paced and draws you in very quickly. As stated, the best way to describe the tone of the game is to the point. You don't have to worry about the Dead Space 3 effect, where there's such an obvious attempt to Hollywood up the dialogue that it gets pretty painful. And I bring up Dead Space 3 because that's probably the best way to describe the phenomenon, going from Dead Space 2, which felt natural enough for the story they wanted to tell, to this.
I knew you'd catch up.
Good to see you made it, Isaac. Maybe we should give you two some time alone, huh?
What the hell does that mean?
It means, for someone who's in the past, you're awfully glad to see him.
We need him. This mission needs
Come on,
him.
we need him or you need him?
Hey, you got something to say to me, Captain?
Everyone knows what the problem is, everyone hates when it pops up, cheap sources of drama, conflict between characters for literally no reason, and cliches you see coming from miles away. New Order avoids most of all this, which is especially shocking for a game series that's only really ever been appreciated as a gameplay-focused thing. Nobody asked for a good story, yet they went above and beyond for it, to the point that they seem to have went out of their way to avoid cheap cliches. One of the first things you think when you enter the Kreisau Circle's secret base in the sewers of Berlin is, of course someone's gonna betray us and leak the location to the Nazis. You even get teases of it, mini levels that take place in the sewers around the base, filled with Nazi robots, the hangar room screams boss fight arena. You're fully expecting that this base is going to turn into a larger shootout level. Why flesh this out so much if you're not going to use it? And hell, it does eventually become a level. You even meet a reformed Nazi called Klaus, a guy who defected and joined the Kreisau Circle, who is caring for a mentally disabled man named Max, who's only capable of saying his own name, treating him almost like he's his son. He's fiercely protective of Max, and is all around kind of a prick. The relationship is strained, and there's never really a point where you feel like they put things aside and become friendly. Now, the obvious thing to assume is Klaus is the traitor, but that'd be too obvious. Instead, they explain that Klaus was a loyal soldier for the Reich until his son was born with a club foot, a disability that put him in the sights of the SS, since they were targets as either fodder for experimentation or shoved into concentration camps and left to die. Klaus and his wife fought to keep their child safe from being taken, but both her and their son were shot and killed. So Klaus has a very personal vendetta against the Nazis, and is actually one of the more outspokenly loyal members to the Circle. The reason he's so protective of Max is because he's the second chance at being a father that Klaus wanted. This is something to remember for later. New Order went out of their way to humanize a Nazi, make him a living, breathing character and someone who has one of the more gut-wrenching scenes in the game. It's outright insane considering the direction the Reboot trilogy went after this. We'll talk about that when it's time for it. All you have to know is that no one in New Order is a stereotype. Even characters you fully expect to be half-assed have some form of natural humanity to them. Bombate, the African warrior BJ meets in a death camp, Set Roth, the Jewish architect that may hold the secret to defeating Death's Head. Even the villains of the game are fleshed out and interesting. The obvious one, Death's Head, is disturbing as all hell. He truly loves experimenting on people and making robots, tearing them apart and slapping armor and guns on them until he's happy with the end result. He's, funny enough, an optimist. He even hates hearing his name in English because it sounds too unpleasant for him. The idea of this Mengele on steroids having a positive outlook towards life is just strange, but it also makes him weirdly captivating, especially since, yeah, it does make sense. He single-handedly pushed the technology of the Reich forward to the point they took over the world. He's hailed as a hero by the Nazis. Even Hitler praises his every step. No wonder he acts like he's on top of the world. He basically is. The other villain of the game, the one that ends up being much more of a presence in New Colossus, is Frau Engel. She's similar to Death's Head, where she's oddly chipper considering her job description, but she's unafraid of getting downright sadistic, enjoying causing pain and suffering to those she deems as inferior. The first time you meet her, she pulls a gun on you and makes you take a test to see if you're a true Aryan, threatening to shoot you dead right in the middle of a public train if you fail, only for her to reveal she was just pulling a prank, and those pictures you pick are just vacation photos she took. Engel enjoys tormenting people, and you see it time and time again in the games, even being put in charge of the concentration camp BJ has to infiltrate later in the game. She's not as prevalent in New Order as New Colossus, but they use her well in this game. When you escape the camp, she's disfigured in the process, now holding a vicious grudge against Blazgo for humiliating and disfiguring her. This is something to remember for later. Frau Engel is sadistic, cruel, and holds monstrous grudges. She kills people for fun and holds zero humanity in her heart. Even her boy toy Booby is another psychopath that enjoys torturing enemies in front of her, spilling their guts out for her delight. These two are complete monsters. Engel in particular would never, have a fat daughter that constantly disobeys and humiliates her. Now on the opposite side of the spectrum you have Anya. She is Blazgo's love interest, a Polish nurse he rescues after the Nazis purged the mental hospital he was staying at for 14 years. Anya is an interesting character. She's capable at slipping in and out of danger, but never deludes herself into thinking she's anywhere near BJ's level. She's clever, not a fighter. Her relationship with Blazgo develops pretty quick. They've known each other for about 3 or 4 cutscenes before they have sex, but the relationship isn't bad by any means. The game is aware of the setting they're portraying and understand the mindset of the characters. What's the point of building up a will they won't they if they could die at any moment? Just roll with the impulses and enjoy things as best you can when you can. And you do get flashbacks that show Anya was caring for Blazgo in the hospital during his entire stay. So technically, they've known each other for a long time. They make it clear the two do care about each other, and the ending of the game relies on the tension of realizing she's been captured by the Nazis. You even get audio logs, supposedly from Anya's cousin, that reveal more of her backstory. She's ashamed of her past and essentially disassociates through this cousin whose diary she's reading from. An interesting point of the logs is questioning what part is her cousin and what part is something Anya is admitting to Blazgo. Her cousin, Ramona, was apparently a quiet resistance fighter, stealthily assassinating Nazis using underhanded methods, poisoning, setting up accidents, and in a major incident, seducing one to kill him in his sleep. That last one resulted in Ramona becoming pregnant, and she works to abort the child, disgusted at the idea of raising a Nazi baby. She successfully aborts it, but it seems like something went wrong during the process. However, it seems like she's back to doing what she's doing, performing more assassinations, getting noticeably more reckless at that, before finally settling down in the hospital where she meets BJ. Remember that Anya flat out admits there's parts of her in this diary, so the question is how much and at what point. It's debated back and forth. Some fans think Ramona never existed and it was all Anya and she's trying to explain who she was out of a sense of shame. Some think that Anya was assisting Ramona and gave up the assassinations when she died. It's not clear, and that's kind of meant to be the point. Personally, I think the smoking gun was at the abortion. There's a log from Ramona where she's describing how much blood she's losing, clearly woozy and not well. My interpretation, as stated, this is just how I see it, so don't take it as gospel, is that Ramona was real and did assassinate various people. When she became pregnant, she confided in Anya for help, who also worked with that family as a nursing student. She successfully received a drug that would abort the child, but it worked too well and it caused a critical miscarriage, killing Ramona from blood loss. From there, Anya tried to take over, but the risks and danger terrified her, and she went back to her life as a nurse with her parents. Because one of the reasons she was so interested in Blazkowicz was the fact he embodied that fighting spirit she wanted to have so badly. She saw her cousin die, one of the few others that tried to take a stand, and Anya was forced to watch everyone around her either die as well or bend their knee to the Nazis, even her own family. and there's a sense of guilt since she indirectly was the reason her cousin died, if we're going off this interpretation. That's just how I see her as a character. As stated, it is up for debate. Regardless, I really like New Order Anya. New Order Anya. Still, everything about New Order is great, even when it dips into the supernatural elements, such as the ancient secret society of engineers that Set Roth is a part of. You never feel like it ever jumps the shark. The idea is that the Nazis found secret caches of technology created by the Shud, and this technology was so far advanced it was the key factor behind the jump in the Nazis' power. So the secret behind the Nazis being able to take over the world is that they stole the technology created by a secret society of Jewish engineers that wanted to test the laws of reality as a way of getting closer to God. There's an irony to this that serves as a sort of dark joke to it all. As arrogant and grand the Nazis make themselves out to be, the secret to everything was technology they stole from those they deemed inferior. It's a subtle joke you're meant to think about, never shoved in your face or treated as a massive gotcha. New Order is all about subtlety. As over the top the setting actually is, the action being balls to the fucking wall, the story and characters rely on those small details that aren't telegraphed to you. Sure, BJ can hack apart a Nazi officer with a chainsaw in a scene, but it's not going to stare at the camera and spell out anything. What's going on with Blazgo and why he's mentally unstable is kept very subtle. You just infer his behavior and what happened to him. Sure, if you played Return to Castle Wolfenstein, you'll probably know a lot of what he's referencing. But if you never played it, then you just piece together the history he has with Death's Head. His childhood is only mentioned in brief voice lines, things you can interpret as you will, and are left intentionally open. Did he have a normal 1910s to 20 childhood, or did he see some shit? It's up to you. And super weird to talk about this for a game where you go up into a Nazi moon base, which you do. It's pretty cool. There's a lot of creativity in the levels. You never go to locations you think you would. Instead of attacking military outposts or armories like the prologue makes you think you will, you're blowing up museums or stealing a Nazi U-boat. There's a variety of levels with a ton of different feels to them. Even Old Blood kept up with this, and the ending of that game is straight up just fighting a legion of Nazi zombies. New Order and Old Blood have this respect for your intelligence. It's hard to say that it's exactly a smart game because it's fully aware it's insane. But that's where the respect comes in. You know it's crazy, they know it's crazy, just have fun with it. And maybe you might even find something you never realized could be as touching as it is. You're allowed to figure out puzzles for yourself, peek around corners when you can, and experience the story. Now, Old Blood is an interesting case. It's a prequel standalone DLC/expansion pack that is essentially a retelling of Return to Castle Wolfenstein. BJ is sent in to infiltrate the eponymous castle and get the location of Death's Head's secret compound, setting up the intro of New Order. But things go tits up and the goal is to escape the castle with the dossier. It's a good DLC. It feels radically different from New Order, but in a good way. You get a new list of perks that change up the feel of gameplay, even adding in a new mechanic where you can overcharge your armor much like health. So you get a temporary boost that can come in handy during the more strenuous fights. You also get a new stock of weapons. This takes place in 1946, so the refined weapons you get in New Order don't exist yet. The guns feel noticeably heavier and clunkier, intentionally so, from the assault rifle to the shotgun to the marksman rifle. Each one feels heavier and slower, making you rethink how to approach certain fights. It's still fully possible to rush in guns blazing if you want to, but you will find moments where that gets punished. Blazgo is meant to be more vulnerable in Old Blood than New Order, so you save the rampages for when they really matter. There's also a change in how the arenas work in Old Blood. Beforehand, bigger fights were kept to spectacle moments. Enemies were spaced out more, and it felt more like encountering bad guys in a larger maze-type level like old-school FPS games. Old Blood leans a tad more into the painkiller style, putting you in big rooms where enemies swarm you, and you have to kill them all before it unlocks. They even change up how enemies feel, with some having different gimmicks to them. Most enemies have large packs on their back that make it hard to insta-kill them with a throwing knife. Heavier super soldiers have obvious vulnerable spots to aim at during a fight. You can kill them with 3 well-placed shots from the marksman rifle, even on higher difficulties. And some are stuck on these rails that restrict their movement. This sounds like they're really weak compared to New Order, but no. They're still absolutely devastating if they corner you. The whole beginning of the game is sneaking past them. You only really start stomping them towards the end, when you have all your upgrades and weapons. Arenas go from tense to a little mindless come the endgame, though they can still kill you quick if you fuck up. New Order had moments like this as well, but Old Blood especially doubles down on it, even giving you an extra mode, where you can replay maps and try to survive as long as you can. It makes sense considering this is much shorter than New Order. That game can be beaten in about 12 hours. Old Blood takes place about 5 or so. It was sold as a standalone DLC for like $30, so it makes sense it would be shorter, but you can feel the anemia in some places. The villain of the game is a guy by the name of Rudy, a massive Nazi who cares for his pack of augmented German shepherds that he dotes on, even fitting them prisoners when he feels like it. Now I say he's the villain of the game, but that's only because he has the largest presence in the DLC. The actual intended antagonist is Helga, a Nazi archaeologist looking into the ruins next to the castle, hoping to find something that could assist Himmler's occult division. Helga is basically a ghost for a majority of the DLC. You read notes about her, but she doesn't show up for a very long time. You're mainly fighting against Rudy and the Nazis at the castle. And honestly, I like Rudy's whole gimmick, being a sadistic madman who enjoys torturing his enemies yet truly loves and cherishes his dogs, even becoming obsessed with revenge on BJ after he kills his favorite German shepherd during his escape, Greta. He's the only one who gets a real boss fight, while Helga dies in a cutscene. You get one decent scene with her where you have to pose as a waiter bringing her wine. It's not bad, but it feels a little tryhard. As stated, we barely knew anything about her until this scene, and it feels like they wanted to capture the same tension as the train scene in New Order. It's not a massive problem, but it is a little disappointing. Still, the final 2 levels are about the Nazi zombies. You fight hordes of undead, which were unleashed when the ruins were broken into, and they're essentially fodder. They die in just a few shots, a single one from a shotgun or a headshot, and they're super slow, only rushing towards you if you get too close. There's a lot of them, but they never really feel like they're a threat, which might have been the point. You spend the whole DLC watching your steps, trying not to get ripped apart by the Nazis, and now everyone's out of their element with the zombies running around. There's moments where you see the Nazis fighting off the horde, but they're quickly overpowered and eaten. You can even contribute to it by picking off a few soldiers from a distance and letting the zombies do the work. You can even strategically create hordes. Certain enemies who are shot won't die, they'll turn into zombies and start attacking enemies at random, which then can cause other enemies to turn, leading to a snowball where you can fire a single bullet and clear an area. Granted, you have to worry about the zombies now, but they're not a threat compared to, the guys with guns. Now, the timeline system sorta comes back for Old Blood, but it's more just a gimmick. These 2 characters you can try to save when the zombies start attacking the city. A former journalist turned resistance fighter named Ludwig, and his young assistant named Annette. You're given a choice on who to save, it depends on which building you go in, left or right, and you're given a variation of the final cutscene depending on who you pick. If you save Ludwig, you discover his plan to spread propaganda flyers all over Berlin, denouncing the Nazis and serving as one final act of rebellion before the inevitable. If you save Annette, she rushes out to save her friend Katrine, and you see the 2 of them in the final cutscene. It's a soft version of the idea and only really serves as details for the finale, but it's a decent enough variation of the gimmick. As stated, 6-hour runtime, manage expectations from here, but there's an interesting detail in the DLC that can affect the later games. Not even kidding. For one, you get a soft confirmation that Blasco did deal with some shit when he was a child, the monster in the basement story, but it's kept extremely vague and meant to be interpreted.
I was a kid. We had a monster in our basement. My father said if I done wrong, it'd creep out at night and come for me. I tried to do no wrong. The monster came all the same.
The idea is that all of Blasco's life, he's fought various monsters, from abuse as a child, to the Nazis, to the literal monsters he encounters. It's a good detail that does expand on his character. Old Blood has some standout moments. In particular, there's a great song in the soundtrack. Mick Gordon handled the soundtrack to basically the whole trilogy minus Youngblood, and he has a good style for the Wolfenstein games. You get his usual heavy industrial type metal, but it's mixed with regular guitar twangs and a sort of western vibe to it, mixing in BJ's Texan roots to industrial metal. It sounds great, and there's tracks that stay in your ear long after. The Old Blood has a cover to the song The Partisan, an old World War II propaganda song from the French Resistance, this time cranked up to the usual Mick Gordon insanity.
When they poured across the border, I was cautioned to surrender.
But you have a moment where they mix in violin and acoustic guitars, and it makes it feel much more thoughtful than just noise fest.
An old woman gave us shelter, kept us hidden in the garret. Then the soldiers came. She died without a whisper. There were 3 of us this morning. I'm the only one this evening.
It's very fitting, especially when samples of the song are used in different segments to the final levels. You feel the transition not just in the music, but for BJ as a character. He starts off the DLC very cocky and arrogant, not really taking the mission seriously, but by the end he's talking exactly like New Order BJ, cryptic and poetic sayings that reveal that deep down he's scared and tired. He views the mission to kill Death's Head as one final step before he can finally rest, which makes the events of New Order all the more tragic. BJ really wants to put up his guns and live what life he can with the little time he has left in the world, but he just can't. New Order does allude to this more than once with the cryptic dreams of BJ enjoying a barbecue with a hypothetical wife and children, which we later see is Anya. Old Blood is a good companion piece to the New Order. It's a fun swashbuckling adventure with hints of tragedy that comes in the later games. It keeps the same tone, if a tad more humorous in places, though it does earn those moments, and is quick to bring it back to something more painful for the emotional emotional beats. It won't make you break down and cry like some people have admitted New Order made them do, but you can tell there's heart and soul in the game. That's a big phrase to use for New Order and Old Blood. Heart and soul. You can tell the people who made those games really cared, and they wanted to make something truly special, to find a good balance between old school FPS and the new era. The more story-focused and cinematic style, fused with thought-out gameplay that isn't afraid of being a video game. Then we got New Colossus. Alright, so New Order was a cult hit. It didn't make waves or change the genre forever, but it developed a loyal fanbase and reignited the fire for the Wolfenstein IP. Bethesda and id tested the waters with Old Blood to see if they could keep the momentum going and if they were confident enough that this new version of Wolfenstein would justify a sequel. So they announced the New Colossus. The first game was about fighting off the Nazi Empire across Europe, but New Colossus would take the series into America, long since occupied and conquered. Blazkowicz has to kick off a revolution and liberate his home country from his lifelong enemy. I'll say right from the get-go, I immediately loved the concept. The idea of going around this alternate history dystopian America sounded fucking amazing. I played a ton of Freedom Fighters when I was a kid, so this would basically be a spiritual successor. Sure, you had games like Homefront, but those were just sort of meh, not terrible, but you'll forget half the story by the time it's over. This new era of Wolfenstein, tackling the Red Dawn concept, sounded like a match made in heaven. But then something happened. In 2016, a guy was elected to the White House that changed media for good. Donald Trump. Out of nowhere, every piece of media felt the need to comment on the Trump election. Not just the usual stand-up comedians or SNL, the usual politically motivated comedy. No, these people, all across the board, no matter what industry they were in, felt the need to call out the rise of fascism in America.
Spoiler alert, Donald Trump wasn't a fascist, and America didn't become a new Reich. Old slipping Jimmy slid his way into this video after all.
It got very insufferable very fast. From movies, to comics, to especially video games. Out of the blue, everyone was expected to care that an election happened. Not just that an election happened, but that it would end the world. Every single thing out there became a part of the culture war. You see, around 2014 or so, you had an event called Gamergate, which is, okay, to put it in brass tacks and the TLDR of it, it was a consumer revolt against game journalists after it was revealed there was a massive issue of incestuous nepotism for the industry. Something that we're still feeling the effects of to this very day, and it really doesn't seem like anything's gonna fix it other than a full-blown video game crash, but, fuck it. Hell, only recently have people been realizing that it's been much worse for much longer than first originally thought. Regardless, before 2016, Gamergate was kept to a relatively niche circle. The general public didn't really care, and it was mostly something you would opt into learning about if you personally wanted to. If you wanted to ignore Zoe Quinn, you could do it. But after 2016, it all hit overdrive. Suddenly, everything needed to be political, and there would be endless arguments over everything being political. Now, games up until this point could and would dip into politics on a few occasions, but it was always a case where from the ground up they wanted to comment on social issues or geopolitics. It depended on the developer, and what the developer wanted to do with their game. Metal Gear Solid from the get-go wanted to discuss things like the nature of war and effects of nuclear weapons. BioShock from the get-go wanted to discuss the philosophy of Ayn Rand and create a dystopia around that. But you could easily go into something like Final Fantasy or Mario and completely ignore any political style message, and everyone agreed that you should have that breathing room. There's games made to make you think, and there's games made to let you just have fun. Hell, in the best cases, you could have both. Franchises like Grand Theft Auto could weave in dumb drunk fun with satire in a way that made everyone happy. Saints Row is the exact same way, also Fallout. The point is you were allowed to have variety. Not everything needed to be political all the time, and it didn't all need to be one angle of politics. But post-2016, media across the board had an aneurysm. Suddenly, a lot of the properties in the West felt like they needed to include political commentary, to the point that it just became part of the zeitgeist that not only are politics required in media, but everything has always been political. Even something as benign as the color of a curtain in the background of a movie is somehow a political statement. Some argue this is mature media literacy. Others say this is societal schizophrenia. Now, as stated, there have been franchises unafraid of dipping into political commentary for a long time at that. The problem is that the standards of what makes something political have gotten so vague that you have some downright baffling takes pop up, like having racial bonuses in D&D is somehow white supremacist propaganda, since it implies that some races are inherently better than others, or that if you play as a Nazi in World War II shooter, then you'll fall into a pipeline that turns you into a real Nazi, or that $70 games aren't a fucking ripoff. Extra credits is a lot of bad takes, we're moving on. The reason I bring this up is because sadly, New Colossus dove straight into this as well. For official marketing material, they leaned into the whole Trump is the Hitler of America thing, even trying to jump onto the punch a Nazi thing that went around after federal agent Richard Spencer was hit by an Antifa member in the streets. Yeah, it became pretty insufferable, because what made New Order great was clearly the political commentary, not, stellar art direction, refined gameplay, touching story of broken people coming together to face an overwhelming force. Yeah, It's basically taking the scene with Jay where he talks about how he dealt with racism even before the Nazis took over America, and trying to blow that up to be even bigger and the main point of the game. Now I understand some of the main motivations around this. DEI ESG funds promoting the idea of companies going political for the promises of funding and credits for loans. It's something that directly hurt the game. Also, look into DEI ESG and now Bridge. They're trying to rebrand it as Bridge. It's a rabbit hole that is genuinely very, very scummy.
Bridge is getting more attention as DEI and ESG are developing a stigma on Wall Street. There's various channels and figures looking into it and hoping to spread the word on this issue, since it's the exact same failed tactics as DEI, just under a new name, and promising to be even more unreasonable and insane. The premier expert on Bridge at the moment is this mentally ill Fox woman from Boston.
Say, look, people like us are, being successful.
No fucking way! There was a fire launcher! What the fuck?
Go check out Kershaw if you want to get the rundown on Bridge. And don't be afraid of looking into things yourself. Best to be aware of what's going on in the world, since funds like these directly impact company behavior. Old Saul can't be contained for too long, pissy boy.
Now, I was convinced for a while that there were stories going around that the developers flat out said that they restart development halfway through New Colossus to comment on the Trump election. I just left it in my brain for a long time because I was so certain it happened, but I couldn't find anything. If anything, I found a bunch of articles saying the opposite, that the developers did whatever they could to avoid commenting on modern politics and any comparisons are purely coincidental, which at least I know for a fact that's bullshit because there's a lot of directly modern references in New Colossus. Not even just the marketing campaign, where at least you can blame that on Bethesda's marketing team. No, I'm talking about stuff in the game that feels like a direct reference to other shit. And the way that the story and certain characters are written really feels like there was a drastic step back from what was originally planned. We're gonna have to talk about that in just a little bit. I have no idea if the developers actually restarted progress on the game halfway through to comment on the Trump election, but the game does feel half finished. New Colossus has the skeleton to a fucking amazing sequel. There's been a massive push for the graphics, making it all look sleek and detailed in a way where it still looks good over 7 years later. The gameplay has been tinkered with. You can now dual wield any weapon you want. You can have an SMG with a shotgun, an assault rifle with a pistol. You get the point. You also get a variation of the laser weapon based on what timeline you pick. A laser gun for Fergus and flamethrower for Wyatt. The upgrade system has been reworked. Now, instead of stumbling into upgrades in a level, you can find part kits that let you pick one of 3 options for each weapon. You can turn an assault rifle into an armor-piercing sniper, SMG into a slower-firing meat grinder, which you kind of need to do to keep up with enemies on higher difficulties, and the shotgun into the strongest weapon in the game. Not even kidding, the shotgun got a major buff. It eats through ammo with its upgrade, but that upgrade fucking slaughters anything you shoot. Even mid-tier enemies go down in just a blast or 2, it's great. The expectation is you're going to have all 3 for each weapon, so make sure to look around in every level. You even get a new melee weapon. New Order gave you knives, Old Blood has a mixture of knives and the pipe, but New Colossus settles on the hatchet. This is a great change, since the hatchet feels so much more visceral. The takedowns are significantly more brutal. Now instead of just stabbing a guy in the head, you can chop his fucking limbs off. They even expand on the way thrown weapons do damage. Now instead of just dropping like ragdolls once they're hit, you can see enemies flinch and react. If you hit a guy in the leg with one, you'll see him fall down on the leg with the hatchet in it. He's still alive, he can still alert everyone else, he's just screaming in pain from a hatchet sticking out of his leg. And his screams are something you need to quiet down as fast as possible, so you have to rush in. It basically just gives you an extra second to close the distance into a takedown, or you can throw a second hatchet and finish him off. It gives you more options and gives you more risks. It makes you think if you really want to risk throwing one out, compared to just tossing knives willy-nilly in New Order. There's a lot here that should make New Colossus much more action-packed than the previous games, especially considering this was right off the heels of Doom 2016, so they had a groundwork to look at and take cues from. In theory, this should have been the perfect marriage of Doom 2016 and New Order. Should have been. Alright, let's rip the band-aid off right now. New Colossus has some fucking problems. Issues with the gameplay that really show this is a game that probably was rebuilt from the ground up, and honestly, it could have even been more than once. For one, the perk system is gutted. The challenges feel much more like a grind, and the rewards they give you just don't feel substantial enough to justify it. You're given upgrades in increments each time you reach a threshold. So, for instance, you assassinate commanders for an upgrade for increased damage for suppressed weapons. Sounds decent, right? The problem is that the only guns with suppressors are the SMG and the pistol. The pistol, which you only ever use to headshot enemies in stealth anyway, which majority of the time is an insta-kill, and the SMG, which you need to swap to the nail gun in order for it to do any damage, which you're probably not going going to use because you have assloads of assault rifle ammo, and the shotgun is the holy grail gun of the game. So basically, you have an entire perk dedicated to just making the SMG feel like it does damage, since one of its upgrades is a built-in suppressor. Another perk is collecting enigma codes from dead commanders. This plays into something I'll talk about a bit later, but each time you reach the threshold for this, the alarm the commander send out is delayed by 0.2 seconds. So at all 5 levels, the most you get for the delay is a single second. And once the enemies are made aware of your presence, all commanders start broadcasting the alarm, and these guys are never close together. They keep a good distance away from each other. So you have a single second to track down where the other commanders are, kill them, and you have to do this before every enemy in the level knows where you are, and commanders start sending reinforcements along with it. It's just not a well thought out perk. Beyond being gimmicky, it's downright useless. But I think the worst thing about the gameplay is the moment-to-moment fights. For about 50% of the game, you're capped at 50 health. That's it. A stark contrast in New Order where you could have 100 health and 100 armor right from the get-go. You can overcharge, sure, but that's a temporary solution at best. And if you don't have armor, you're going to be shredded no matter how much health you soak up, making some shootouts downright infuriating at times. And no, you can't find any health upgrades. You can't raise the cap until an arbitrary moment of the story, and this decision really hurts the flow at times. You're given perks and tools that encourage you to play more aggressively, to be the crazy shooty man like New Order and Old Blood let you do at times. The big gimmick that sorta serves as a secondary source of perks are the contraptions. Gadgets you receive that open new paths and levels and allow more options in combat. The ramshackle is essentially military-grade football pads. You rush ahead and break through walls, or people. It's meant for the fuck it moments where you charge ahead and try and knock down a group of bad guys like bowling pins. The constrictor harness that lets you snake around and slip through cracks and holes that should be physically impossible for a normal human, aimed for more stealthy playthroughs since you can perform takedowns while hidden, but be careful since you'll lose health if you use it too long. And the final one is the Battle Walker, a pair of stilts that let you reach higher ledges. Each contraption has their gimmick, and each one comes with their own new set of perks, along with a special perk you grind to unlock, and an upgrade for each contraption you get by doing side missions. Some of these perks are substantially better than the base ones you get. The constrictor harness makes you more silent as you crouch around, and even has the game go into slow-mo if you're spotted, so you have a chance to kill an enemy before everyone's alerted. The Battle Walker slows the game down when you open the weapon wheel so you can think about what gun to use without pressure. Admittedly, this is very, very light in regards to the contraption perks because it's just doing the thing that Doom 2016 did. Also, the ramshackles prevent you from being knocked down by explosions, something that really feels like a fucking godsend by the time you get to it, because being wombo comboed by enemies with explosive weapons is fun, right? You enjoy having an entire extra second needed to get BJ's fat ass off the ground that leaves you vulnerable to being hit by another explosion, right? Which can also throw you to the ground, especially when you have 50 health and can die very quickly when you're on the ground. All these upgrades are leagues more helpful than base perks, and really makes me wonder why they're arbitrarily locked to these gimmick devices, since the game just feels better once you have them. You can only pick one during the story, but if you do side content, you'll get all 3. It really feels like they locked the best perks behind these contraptions to arbitrarily lengthen the gameplay, since you're gonna want to get all 3 to make the gameplay feel better. And speaking of side content, you have some minigames you can play in your hub area, a clearinghouse, a shooting range, along with doing favors for various resistance members around the submarine. The main time sink, however, is grinding enigma codes to hunt down the Uber commanders. Prime targets you hunt down by replaying levels, allowing you to track down missing collectibles and upgrades you missed the first time. And I do mean grind. Each commander has a certain amount of codes you need to spend to unlock the minigame to track them down. And if you screw up the minigame for whatever reason, you'll lose a certain amount of codes, meaning you literally have to go in and grind to get codes in order to unlock the ability to grind other levels. It gets very tedious very quickly. You have to do a certain amount of these missions to unlock the next story segment, in a way that screams this is an unfinished idea. You get a hub map that is suddenly thrust upon you out of nowhere halfway through the game, something that hints this was meant to be a larger feature that was reworked. And the idea that you're just replaying levels to hunt down Ultra Commanders show that this was going to be more of a mechanic or a time sink they half-assed at the last second, since the Commanders aren't even characters. They get one introduction where you enter the mission, but after that, they're a blip on a map you clear out. It really feels like they wanted to make this more of a thing, that there would be a focus in the story around hunting down commanders and crippling leadership structure, which could have been fucking sick. Take ideas from Freedom Fighters where you assassinate figures or sabotage various points, and you can see the impact in different missions, yet that never happens. They feel completely disconnected, to the point that when you beat the game and get to the end credits, you just get a message out of nowhere saying, go kill the rest of the Ultra Commanders. You don't even get anything cool from it, no final cutscene or anything like that. It's so out of nowhere, and screams that this was tacked on to artificially inflate the game length. Now, contrary to what you may hear, the game isn't 6 hours long or anything like that. It's about the same length as New Order, side content not included. If you just want a fun shootout game, it's not the worst. but there's obvious issues with it that really scream in your ear, especially if you play on higher difficulties. I played all 3 of these on Uber, which is the hard mode. Not too bullshit, but more of a challenge than normal. New Order is great on this setting. Enemies hit hard, but you're given plenty of opportunities to return the punishment. It's a good back and forth that always feels fair. Arenas have a lot of thought put into them. You just have to learn how to manage them and be aware that you're probably going to be cut down quick if you fuck up. Old Blood, leaning more on clearing out a room, can be a bit more bullshit at times, since you're swarmed on all sides. It's not impossible by any means, but there are segments that give you a headache. New Colossus just flat out isn't fun on a higher difficulty. Since your health is gimped to just 50, you are quickly torn to pieces in the beginning of the game, so you're all but forced to play stealthy to survive agonizing difficulty spikes. The very first level, that makes sense. You are forced to play as BJ in a wheelchair. You're meant to be challenged here, and you're thrown out of your element. The problem is that this pretty much is how the game feels for over half of it. You always feel just as weak, and you're scrambling for resources. The courtroom shootout has downright made people drop the game because they get so frustrated with it, at least how it was on launch. It didn't really bother me too much, but it did feel pretty damn cheap at times. Also, Venus has this sort of robot dog enemy. It follows you around, shoots a laser, and if you kill it, it blows up, so constantly tries to stick close to you. I hate them. They suck. You get the theme. There's really good ideas stacked right next to really frustrating ones that don't feel thought out at all. It's like you had the New Order team trying to come up with ideas on how to expand the gameplay, and in the middle of it, there was a group of Randys that barged in and demanded a bunch of dumb gimmicks. Stuff that sounded good on paper, but in practice was just frustrating. Constrictor takedowns sound cool, they can even look cool, but very rarely will you ever actually get an enemy to walk past an enemy where you can use it, unless you sit and camp a spot, which you're risking losing health over, and just for what? Another takedown animation? To grind up a perk that increases movement speed when using the harness? It just isn't worth it. It's so they could show off gameplay and previews and trailers. In practice, you're not going to use it all that much. Gameplay-wise, New Colossus is not perfect. It has half-baked ideas that can dip between gimmicky to downright annoying, but this can all be forgiven if the story's good, right? Right? Alright, so I already mentioned this game had problems come 2016. It definitely feels like it was rebuilt in some areas to comment on the Trump election. The developers swear up and down that's not what happened, but you feel it a lot. You see, the New Order had a great story. It was very down-to-earth and character-focused. It kept the Nazis to be this massive, almost indestructible enemy. No matter how much the Kreisau Circle fights, they're always at risk of being consumed by the Great Beast. The Nazis weren't meant to be an allegory for anything. They're just the dystopia, the system oppressing people and destroying the world. You could take away the iconography and rename them to something else, and the story of New Order works just fine. The Nazis could be remade to be the Soviets, and it works. Or some complete unknown faction that isn't based on anybody, because the New Order wasn't trying to comment on anything current. It was a story about the human spirit and bravery in the face of oppression. It's a universal theme, something that can work no matter what era you look at it from.
The things I've seen in this life. Strange shit that turns your stomach. Turns your hair white.
Alright, Captain Cowboy. Roger. This is your buddy boy Klaus Kreuz in the car heading toward the London Nautica. Roger. Find your way down to the parking lot and I will pick you home. Roger.
I've seen 1,000 battles.
The London Nautica is opening fire. I think they are shooting at you.
I've seen the sun set on 5 different continents. I've seen dust rise off the surface of the moon. But all I want is to see you again.
It's not doomed to age like milk because it tried to stay on the cutting edge. New Colossus really feels like the opposite. It makes references to current political issues circa 2016, and seems to go out of its way to make characters stand-ins for political enemies or factions the writer likes. The exact thing the New Order avoided doing. The cast there weren't meant to be representatives to an ideology or a group, they were individuals with their own histories and goals. That's what made them compelling to watch. You saw how the atrocities of the Nazis affected so many different people. Not just groups, but people. From Klaus to Caroline to even the refugees you rescue from the camp.
I'm on the move. I need to find Fergus and Caroline. You should come with me.
And violate my model. The model is loyal to universal causality. You ask me to rebel against the laws of nature, don't you see? The road in front of you is long and so hard. I wonder how you will cope. Mine is at its end. On this day. I am glad to have found my friend.
Even Old Blood did this, though it was smaller and didn't have enough time to flesh anybody out. The point is that you cared about the cast and wanted to see them win in the end. New Colossus explicitly and repeatedly makes the issue about groups. Individuals only partially matter. The new characters you meet are representatives to their respective ideologies. Grace and her group are essentially the Black Panthers, a black resistance group hiding out in the ruins of New York. And they all talk and look like 60s to 70s blaxploitation characters. Grace herself is the most exaggerated of the group, and they even have entire rants that have gone on infamy for being so on the nose and preachy. Her sorta husband, sorta boyfriend Super Sesh is the over-the-top conspiracy theorist. He's meant to be an activist lawyer that believes in fighting against the system by using the rules against them. He also believes the Nazis got their technology from space aliens to magic Jews. It would have been an interesting bit if they just hit the brakes and made him more grounded, like maybe he could actually piece together events Blazkowicz actually did do, like talk about the ruins incident from Old Blood or something like that. Also, if New Order didn't outright confirm it came from the Ichud, so the alien thing is just the writer trying to make Sesh wacky, because that's a serious problem as well. You also meet a preacher named Horton, leading his own group of resistance fighters in Louisiana, which thankfully doesn't seem to be too damaged by the occupation. It's nice, I always liked New Orleans. At first, he seems like an actual human being who wanted to fight the Nazis out of a sense of duty, but nope, he's an over-the-top communist. This is something I'm going to talk about later, because it's weird and might be proof to where I'm talking about, where the game feels like it was basically torn apart and reworked in some areas. You also have Sigrun. She's the daughter of Frau Engel. She's also fat. That's it. Yeah, she's a complete non-character for a very large part of the game. She defects from the Nazis after being separated from Engel during the intro, which, why the fuck would you take your non-military daughter on a military operation? Just doesn't make any sense. And just sort of kept around by the group. They take constant potshots at her for her weight, being a former Nazi, being a loser, and she also has sex with Bombate. I won't say anything about them making the black guy fuck a fat white woman if you don't. To put it simply, every new character feels fake. They feel like bad attempts at jokes instead of living people like New Order. I don't want to know about these characters. I don't like them, and they feel like massive wastes of time. The very few that don't annoy me are just boring. They have a guy who's good at playing clarinet. That's his thing. He doesn't make me wish he was eaten by a robot dog, but if he ever did die from something, I wouldn't have ever been upset. He's just a guy who plays clarinet. Though probably the worst addition are BJ's parents. They are, without a doubt, the best possible representations to the issues wrong with this game. Concepts that sound good on paper, but are pushed so far that they are living parodies. You find out that BJ's mother was a Polish Jew that immigrated to America around the early 1900s. There she met BJ's father, Rip, and the two married. While she was a kind and loving mother, Rip was horrifically abusive and admits he only married her because she was a Jew. He was under the impression her family would help run his business better and grew hateful when he went bankrupt. I'm not kidding, this actually happens.
Will not let you hurt my son.
You shut your damn mouth, or shut it for you.
What is it with you damn Jews? Have all the answers, do you? Smart mouth goddamn Jew. I married you, I figured your father'd be an asset, but you just a damn millstone, sticking your nose into my business instead of handling your own.
Blasco's father only married his wife because he thought her being Jewish would help his business. Yeah, right from the get-go, you kinda see the issue. The guy is so over-the-top bigoted that he's outright a comedy character. Dude is impossible to take seriously with his antics, but the game fully expects you to take him dead serious. They made him so despicable that you can't find any humanity in the guy, but it's not meant to be a joke. They go so far making him a monster, you just burst out laughing. The one time the game isn't trying to be funny is the part where I laughed. The intro of the game is BJ, critically wounded from the ending of New Order, hallucinating a memory from when he was a child, of his father coming home and beating his mother while he hid in the closet. His father rants and raves about BJ befriending a black girl. 1930s, obviously, that was an issue with Jim Crow South, revealing that he only married his mother because of the Jewish economy buff, and starts beating his crying wife. Okay, serious scene time. Melodramatic as all hell, yeah, but it's clearly not trying to be funny. Then you play as BJ whipping lamps at your dad's head to protect your mom. I cannot stress this enough. This was extremely funny. When I found out you were expected to throw lamps, I couldn't stop laughing. It's just impossible to be into this scene at all when you realize the room is scattered with lamps and you can even pull off trick shots, jumping and throwing lamps. You can even pull off 360 no-scopes.
I'm gonna kick your ass.
But in the end, BJ is taken down to the basement, strapped to a table, and you're forced to shoot your dog dead for the crime of talking to a black girl. Once again, this is something on paper meant to be horrific and tragic, but it's just funny. The idea that BJ's dad is such an asshole he would shoot his own dog out of a rage because his son talked to a girl is just comedy gold. He's ranting like a madman, dropping slurs slurs every other sentence, and it's just perfect. It's a fucking South Park bit, and it's not a thing where I can't admire dramatic or fucked up scenes. New Order had plenty of those. It's just that New Colossus goes so over the top, it jumps several sharks. New Order understood restraint. New Colossus thinks restraint is having Hitler piss and puke all over the place to let you know he's mean and pathetic. They make it a point that BJ goes back home to confront his childhood and his father one last time, where you discover that the story of Blasco diving into the well to find the pocket watch his father dropped was from an order.
We got two options. Either I pay good money for a new pocket watch, or you go down the well and
Rip told him to dive down so he wouldn't have to spend money on a new watch. I hated this, because I like the idea that BJ just dove down there without a second thought. He's impulsive and just does things. That's BJ. Making it to where his dad made him just feels, once again, indulgent. You also get more insight into the girl BJ talked to, which set off the dog incident, Billy. It's decently cute for what it is, seeing the two kids spend time together and bond for the little bit we see, but it's completely pointless because Billy never comes up at any point in the game, and it's all there just to set up the dog execution. Once again, a little hard to take this seriously. There's a few other moments as well, something I do want to talk about later, because they're further proof that I really do believe this game was torn apart and put back together, not just with Horton, but with his father as well. All you have to know is I'm talking about the pocket knife scene and the basement. Now, the real gem of this segment is when he actually confronts his dad, where you find out his father struck it rich by schmoozing up the Nazis, even selling his wife to them so she would be killed in a concentration camp. Jesus fuck, dude. Also, his dad's a complete unrepentant asshole to the very end. BJ kills him, and you find out the whole reason for this level was so BJ could get his mother's wedding ring, which he used to propose to Anya, so they'll officially be husband and wife. Alright, fine, whatever. Yeah, there's not a single ounce of subtlety in this game. Now, someone just coming into the Reboot trilogy from New Colossus will go, yeah, and? Because they didn't play the other games, which did push the brakes on moments. What makes the over-the-top scenes in New Order work is they're played very straight and not indulgent. You are invested in the story and the scene, then they go nuts with it. New Colossus wanted to be over the top without a moment to breathe, and the worst part is that even returning characters aren't immune to this. Set Roth, the exhausted and introspective engineer that feels a sense of guilt over the Nazis using his society's technology to conquer the world, is now a mad scientist who talks like a fucking Woody Allen character, constantly using Hebrew slang and taking around like Dr. Frankenstein, even having this weird cat-monkey hybrid monster he created as a pet. He feels like a cartoon character. Fergus, the no-nonsense Royal Air Force wing commander that was not scared to bust somebody's balls, is now just a background character. His gimmick is that he likes a girl and has a robot arm that doesn't listen to him. Other than that, he doesn't do anything, which kind of sucks because I liked what they set up in New Order with him, where he feels a genuine sense of survivor's guilt that he is an old generation that should be dead, and the new generation should have taken up the fight for them. I mean, that was his whole rant in New Order, that he feels like their time is coming to an end and eventually they'll be too old and faded to even stand any chance against the Nazis.
What's this about, Fergus?
I don't know. Nothing. Everything. It's about that boy, goddammit, Private Wyatt. He should be here instead of me. He was young. He had potential. He could have given us a future. You and me were two fucking mummies from the past, running on nothing but willpower.
I made the wrong choice.
Oh, that's fucking obvious, isn't it? I was ready to die. I would have done it gladly. I worked my ass off to save that boy, Blazkowicz, and you fucking pissed it away on a whim. Remember Prendergast? That fucking kid, he could endure anything. Now he's gone. They're all fucking gone. And you're stuck with this useless fucking skeleton. I mean, tell me, what's the long-term solution, eh? Who's gonna take over when we're too damn battered to strap on the holsters anymore? Get the fuck out. I need a nap.
Now, Wyatt is just a druggie trying to deal with the death of Jay by stealing all of his LSD, and this is meant to be a joke since he's constantly tripping balls. They don't take it very seriously at all, which, once again, hey, remember Wyatt's whole thing about how he didn't feel like he was up to snuff to lead the Kryzow Circle and need to be reassured that he could do his job and they could fight? Yeah, that whole thing that made him interesting.
I'm not cut out for this, you know?
Cut out for what?
This. Everything. I was 18 years old, and suddenly the war was lost. Everything good in the world died. Somehow I was the one supposed to pick up the pieces and keep the resistance going, take on the whole gosh darn Nazi empire. You think I was ready for that kind of responsibility? My ignorance got so many good people killed. Remember Private Prendergast? You know, that guy, he could survive anything. So tough. Well, I got him killed, sent him out on a mission, and he never came back. I just didn't know any better. Wing Commander Fergus Reed. He wouldn't know what to do. He could have saved so many.
I made the wrong choice.
You made a stupid choice! Yes, you did! You left the boy in charge of a man's work. I should have died on that day, Captain, on that slab, and Fergus Reed should have lived. I'm not a child anymore, Captain. I know when mistakes were made. There. Leave me alone now, you hear?
Alright, I guess now he's just a drug addict. Bombate literally doesn't do a single thing in the story. He's around in the submarine taking care of Max now that Klaus is dead. But in that, he has zero impact on anything. At least in New Order, he tells Blasco how to get into the section of the camp where Set's at. Also, he fucks the fat German lady. I'm only going to accuse it of being racist because the developers would have a heart attack about it, and I don't like them. Caroline isn't the brains of the operation anymore. Honestly, it's for the best. Better to be killed off than flanderized. Blasco himself is made into a mopey sad sack that spends the first half of the game constantly whining about the death of Caroline. He feels like he can't do this anymore, and he should detach from everyone so he can die of kidney failure without them mourning him. Yeah, his body was super fucked up from the New Order, so he's basically on his last legs and dying and relies on the power suit Caroline had. His inner monologues are directly addressed to Caroline, and this gets very annoying after a while. Like, yeah, him and Caroline were buddies, but dude, she died in the intro. That was a long time ago. Get over it. Alright, in all seriousness, immediately after her death, it does make sense, but by the time you reach New York, Blasco shouldn't still be harping on how Caroline is dead, especially since Grace basically just replaced her as leader of the Chryso Circle. Why not Fergus or Wyatt? The guys have been there longer and know the group more. Ah, fuck it, who cares? We all know why they did it. The point is, BJ feels so much more toned down than how he was. No longer does he have all those poetic sayings and observations about what's going on around him. Now he's just kind of reacting to everything. He doesn't really feel as much of a character as he did before. Especially doesn't help when they have him engage in some of the goofier moments in the game, which just doesn't really work for me. Goofy Blasco was in Old Blood, where he didn't really take everything seriously. New Order Blasco was fucked up in the head. Yeah, he had moments where he tried to be, I guess, lighthearted or try to have some form of levity, but they're very brief, and he had a lot of gallows humor to him. The guy's crazy. Not in a goofy, haha funny way, like he's legitimately mentally ill. He has moments where he does feel like old school BJ, but a lot of the time it's separated from the cutscenes where they try to make everyone banter back and forth. It legitimately feels like two different stories happening at once. Hell, the biggest proof of that is Anya. Anya now is a complete fucking joke. No longer is she the quiet and thoughtful woman she was before, now they want her to basically be a fucking commando, fighting Nazis right alongside BJ. Which wouldn't be an issue if she wasn't also heavily pregnant. Yeah, despite being pregnant with twins, they have Anya constantly going on missions and getting into gun battles, even having her do over-the-top acrobatic moves in cutscenes that 100% would cause a miscarriage if this was sticking to any form of reality, you know, like New Order did. And there's the infamous Rambo scene where she's shirtless and shooting a whole room of Nazis. It's exceptionally dumb, not just because of the fact she's pregnant, but the fact that this isn't Anya. She wasn't a super killer in New Order, she's meant to be the smart one. Blasco was the one who blew shit up. Anya deciphered information, helped form plans. She was strong in her own way that didn't involve this. It's to the point where the phrase writer's barely disguised fetish has cropped up more than a few times in regards to Anya. And honestly, I kinda believe it. It's so baffling and out of character that there had to have been some ulterior motive. The obvious answer is that this is the team's idea of what a strong female character looks like, since the pregnant fighter trope had popped up more than a few times in recent years, and especially around the time this game was being made. But some moments with Anya directly lean into someone jerking off to this. The fact she gets a shirtless scene that shows her tits, and even a radio call where she outright says the pregnancy makes her excited.
William, don't know if this is normal, but I think the pregnancy is making me a little, excited. Oh God, is everyone listening in on this frequency? Yes.
Yes. Max sauce.
There's clearly a sexual undertone for this, and the writers want you to believe they made Anya stronger as a character, when in truth all they did was devolve her into, dare I say it, a fetishistic sex object. That's not an exaggeration, it's just what happened. I mean, it's this thing of, that's all she is now. She's just the pregnant wife of BJ who totes a gun around like everybody else. Now, you can make the argument that desperate times come for desperate measures, and they need everybody on board with this in order for their revolution to work, but no, not really. I mean, their U-boat is perfectly staffed with a ton of resistance members that could replace her, once again giving other characters more things to do, like, I don't know, Bombate or Fergus or Wyatt, maybe even Sigrun if they truly wanted to push her. But the whole point is, for some reason, it had to be Anya. It had to be Anya, even though that's not her character, that was never her character, and she's in a position where it makes even less sense. Also, not gonna lie, it does make me question the purpose around the Sigrun Bombate thing. They keep saying it's progressive and in the know on current events, and it all comes down to writers' barely disguised fetish. It wouldn't even be a problem if A, it wasn't annoying, and B, if they didn't think this was some kind of biting social satire. Some people even think that New Colossus is better than New Order. So if you think this is better than what came before, no, man, no. It's the problem with this current era of writing, at least when the game was coming out at that time. We're still kind of seeing it, but it is fading away bit by bit. New Colossus came way before we ever realized it was a thing, but this does embody the Sweet Baby effect. For those unaware, Sweet Baby is a consultant company that AAA studios hire to help with writing, story crafting, stuff like that for their games. They're incredibly infamous for being shady and incompetent, with horror stories coming out about how they basically barge in and strong-arm devs to get their way, only made even more suspicious when the Sweet Baby Detected account on Steam was brigaded by industry insiders and journalists out of the blue for simply pointing out they exist. There's no concrete proof New Colossus was made in collaboration with Sweet Baby. Hell, the company seemed to have been made pretty recently, though the people involved with it say this type of consultancy work has been going around for a while, but fuck does it feel like something they do, hiding egregious stereotypes and barely disguised wish fulfillment / fetishes under the guise of being progressive. They even have Deborah Wilson. Honestly, I feel bad for this lady. She's not even a bad actress, she's just in bad video games. The point is that the story about how they rebuilt Colossus from halfway through really feels more and more plausible the more you think about it and the more you look at the game. Because, honestly, what the fuck happened here? How do we go from a methodical and thought-out story in New Order to the schizophrenic mishmash of Inglourious Bastards and Fatherland? Like, the fuck happened? That comparison wasn't an exaggeration either. Tons of articles came out comparing New Colossus to Inglourious Bastards, pointing to where the over-the-top shit for the story came from, the influence of how they did the Nazis, stuff like that. Now, the thing is, okay, Inglourious Bastards is not a bad movie by any means, but I definitely think it's one of the weaker Tarantino films. It kind of felt confused and like you couldn't really decide what premise it wanted to do, which is why a lot of the subplots in the movie kind of just feel completely separate until the very end where they all come to a head for not much real reason. It's mainly a movie carried by a few very, very good scenes, like the bar scene, the baseball bat scene, stuff like that. The few 10 out of 10 moments that really stick in your brain compared to the others are just kind of okay. And I think the comparisons mainly come from the fact both are basically black comedies, I guess. That's ignoring the fact that Inglourious Bastards, for a large chunk of the movie, isn't really that funny. It's pretty damn grim. Those standout scenes I mentioned are not very funny scenes, they're pretty damn intense. So if New Colossus took elements from Inglourious Bastards for the story and the characters, at best it'd be very surface level, and the idea is, how about we do over-the-top violent black comedy jokes with Nazis, which kinda missed the forest for the trees there. Now there is a single saving grace this game has, and that's the villain. So to spoil the ending of New Order, BJ kills Death's Head but is mortally wounded in the process. He's picked up by his friends and kept alive, though he dips into a coma for a few months, only to awaken to find the Nazi U-boat the Kreisau Circle stole is under assault by Frau Engel. She's still alive after the events of the previous game. Not only is she alive, but she is pissed, declaring all-out war on the Resistance and personally leading the charge to hunt them down. She even delights in torturing Blasco and his friends once they're captured, mocking BJ for being rendered crippled by his injuries and personally decapitating Caroline, even playing with the severed head just to rub the salt in the wound all that more. Engel is truly and genuinely angry with Blasco. She enjoys making him suffer and goes out of her way to make it as much of a spectacle as she can. All in all, she's a fantastic villain. Engel is genuinely menacing and feels smart. She wins more than once against BJ and his friends. They just luck out or rely on black magic to keep them going. That last part's not a joke. BJ is kept alive after being fucking decapitated and given a new body to fix that whole dying of kidney failure problem, which is stupid. Regardless, Engel has a lot of great moments. She's the only character I liked seeing and kept liking her until the end of the game. Very rarely was there a moment where I rolled my eyes, and those purely came from Sigrun, her daughter, which I'm just gonna say real quick, Frau Engel is a violent psychopath that likes murder, torture, and having her boyfriend Booby spills people's intestines in front of her. She's essentially a mad dog for the Nazis. They used a sledgehammer, so if she had a daughter that constantly disobeyed her or outright humiliated her in front of Adolf Hitler himself, there's zero doubt she would shove her ass first into a furnace without a second thought. Engel is that level of cruel, so the idea that Sigrun could even exist just feels wonky. Also, there's no arc with her. She just breaks down crying when told to execute Caroline and then immediately defects. Now granted, they did have a gun on her head, but the point is, she doesn't really learn anything. She goes from not liking the Nazis to now not liking the Nazis even more. So, you know, we even find out Engel read her diary, which is full of traitorous thoughts and degenerate urges. Basically, she's not 100% loyal to the Reich and found black guys handsome. The Bombate thing. They were setting that up. So once again, why wouldn't Engel just kill her? It's not like she has any real form of familial loyalty. Engel loves the Reich. She only cares about that and enjoys killing their enemies. She outright ran a death camp in New Order. It really feels like Segun is only there so they could humiliate Engel by proxy, which doesn't work because she doesn't give two fucks. Segun isn't anywhere close to a Nazi loyalist they could bully anyway. It feels, once again, half thought out, like it's not finished and was rushed. They like the idea of Engel's daughter being a traitor, and didn't really bother to think about the details to it. It's a mess. And what saves Engel is the fact she doesn't give a shit. She even kills Super Sesh, which shows that there is a spark of humanity in her, since she seemingly went out of her way to spare us, the player, from having to listen to this jerk-off.
Hey! Help! Help! Open the door! He fucking attacked me, man! He broke my nose, and then he got out through that door right there! Fucking Terror Billy! He's on the loose! Stay back. And he had help. They came in right through that door, and they broke him out. It was space aliens, man!
Schnitt! Cut! Zimmermann, Sie haben Talent. Sie sollten zum Film gehen, bei Helene vorsprechen.
Guter Schuss, General. Der zuckt noch.
There is good in him, I felt it.
I really didn't like Super Sesh. This scene was very cathartic. You get the point. No matter how annoying the rest of the cast ends up being, Frau Engel's presence as a villain helps the story, since they never treat her as a joke and she's able to do big damage. And that's something I need to talk about. The jokes. New Colossus suffers from an issue where it thinks it's way funnier than it really is. There's serious tone clashes in the game. Once again, something that points to the idea that this was torn apart and put back together halfway through. Some scenes in the game 100% follow the New Order style, focusing on the oppression, the inherent tragedy of what's going on in this dystopia. Then you have completely out of the blue attempts at jokes that feel like a flashbang went off next to your ear. Funny enough, I think the people comparing the game to something like Inglourious Basterds once again really highlights the problem here. A lot of contemporaries that try to ape the Tarantino style tend to get a lot of it wrong. Not just because of the fact that it's kind of hard to do a Tarantino style when Tarantino himself is the only one capable of replicating his own style, but it's the fact that a lot of the time, people just want to focus on hyper-violent comedy. Now, there's comedy elements in Tarantino movies, yes, but that's not all they are. Pulp Fiction has funny scenes, but it's a crime thriller. Kill Bill has funny scenes, but it's a revenge movie. Reservoir Dogs barely has any jokes in it. It takes itself very seriously. The only real strict comedies Tarantino has done is stuff like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and maybe Jackie Brown if you want to get technical, and even then, not really. So you go from New Order, which is consistent in its tone throughout the whole game, to New Colossus, which ping-pongs around like crazy. You go from a character giving a monologue of what it was like to be in New York when the atom bomb was dropped, describing death and destruction in a way that is not a joke, it alludes to the Hiroshima-Nagasaki bombings, to mocking the idea of having balls being a sign of strength.
For a little I spoke with Caroline, she seemed like a hell of a woman.
She had balls of steel.
Balls. Why is it that balls are always used as some fucking default definition of badassery?
I said before that Grace sours herself on players pretty fast. This is why. She's also breastfeeding a baby while smoking, because that's funny, right? That makes you laugh. Super Sesh is strictly a joke character, doing everything from his monologue about aliens to blowing up the U-boat bathroom. He's trying so hard to be the comedic relief, you even get the scene where he pulls a gun on BJ because he thinks he's a space alien. Yeah, remember that thing I said about New Order not having fake attempts at tension? Yeah, I sure do miss that. The Venus segment of the game quickly becomes an overlong joke scene, something that not only overstayed its welcome and got on my nerves, but really showed the missed potential the game had. For context, there's a segment where you have to infiltrate the Nazi base on Venus to get codes so you can infiltrate a different base later in the game. It's essentially a remake of the moon level from New Order, but expanded on to be bigger and have a gimmicky moment where you manage a cooling system in your spacesuit. Visually, it looks a lot like the Mars facility from Doom 2016, which a voice in my gut is telling me probably was intentional. The level itself is fine. By this point in the game, you have upgrade health and contraptions, so it feels fun instead of the slog the early game could be. It's just the story that's frustrating. You see, the whole idea is that BJ gains access to the facility by posing as an actor who's going to portray himself in a propaganda film made to chronicle the evil terrorist Terror Billy. Over the years, Blasco's war with the Nazis turned him into a villain figure, and the Reich want to capitalize on that now that they think he's dead, being used as a sort of Emmanuel Goldstein figure, the public enemy number one that is used to scapegoat everything that happens and act as a target to focus public outrage. The idea does sound interesting to see the inner workings of Nazi culture and see how they view the actions of BJ. We see it as kick-ass action hero stuff, but the actual people living in the setting is probably horrifying. When Blasco is captured earlier in the game, he's paraded around in the public eye, with a lady breaking down in tears and trying to attack him because her son was a soldier that Blasco killed. There's hints that they were going to show the issue wasn't as black and white as what we saw in New Order. The Nazis are this horrible force that stomped on humanity, yes, but there were innocent people caught in the crossfire. Every soldier you kill is somebody that had a family and loved ones that don't see the Kreisau Circle as liberating heroes, but as violent terrorists that spread only death and suffering. We even had a hint of it in New Order with Klaus. There could potentially be more men like him stuck under the thumb of the Nazis, since the commanders are all violent psychopaths that aren't afraid to throw anyone into a meat grinder just for the hell of it. That's what they wanted to do with Sigrun, showing that even somebody as high up as Frau Engel's daughter isn't as on board for the Reich as you would think. This is something that truly feels like was meant to be part of the game, and was quickly snuffed out when 2016 happened, and the world went insane. That's at least my theory, because the big tagline the game uses is the question of whether or not America wants to be liberated. The character of Grace swears that white America gave up and embraced the Nazis, and the Roswell scene shows off the almost utopian view of the country, with happy people throwing a parade for their supposed oppressors. Except that's not really what's happening. There's multiple signs that no, people do not like this. There's terrified civilians who do whatever they can to not piss off the occupying force, since they're fully aware that any wrong move leads them to a death camp. You have the lady telling her child to learn German, since that's expected of them now, and quickly rushes them out of the diner when a Nazi commander arrives. There's entire ghettos made out of once major American cities. New York was fucking nuked, which killed countless innocents, and was the major incident that led to America surrendering. America didn't willingly give up, they were scared shitless. There's a difference. Even the famous KKK segment is something wildly misinterpreted and taken as proof that America would have loved Nazi occupation, with two Klansmen trying to fix their German along with a Nazi soldier. But listen to the actual exchange real quick.
You have a choice in this new world, because the time will come when, how do you say, the wheat detaches from the chaff. Have you taken your German lessons?
Oh, yes, sir.
Good. You, how do you say thank you in German?
Oh, of course, sir. Let me see. It's,
Yes?
Dank.
Yes, out with it.
Danky.
My God. Was that all right? No, that was terrible. You're butchering my beautiful language. It's Danke schön, verdammt. Say it.
Danke schön?
Incorrect. Danke schön.
Danke schön?
I've heard enough. No more.
I'm so sorry, sir. I'm still practicing.
You will practice hard.
Oh, I will, sir. I am so sorry.
Yeah, these guys are terrified of the soldier, who's very blunt and aggressive towards them. This is not a happy exchange, this is actual oppression. Two men forced to live up to the standards of this literal invader coming in and forcing his way of life on them. Having to be Klansmen was only really there to go, racism, am I right? It's supposed to be a gotcha, but all it does is show the scope of how bad the occupation has gotten. Even a group as infamous as the KKK, a notorious terror group around this time, are broken down into blubbering cowards in the face of the Nazis, forced to toe their line when just a decade or two earlier they were the guys people were scared of. America isn't some brainwashed stooge that needs to wake up to the horrors around them. They're fully aware they have a gun to their head, so you have a collection of different reactions to it. Some buck against it, want to fight, some keep their heads down and just do what they're told to avoid trouble, others will try to learn this new system and excel at it, which is where the nuances could have come from. The movie Audition even takes it a step further, where you have a group of actors along with BJ trying to get the part, unaware that they have to audition with Adolf fucking Hitler in the room with them, and if he finds their performance unsavory, they get executed. Once again, an overwhelming show of force, purely to show they could do it. It could have legitimately been an intense scene that's quickly turned into a complete joke, with Adolf Hitler being this feeble old man that pisses everywhere, pukes, clearly has dementia. He's a spastic cartoon, much like Blasco's father. This guy isn't a character, he's a mouthpiece. It's just the game going, guys, Hitler was le bad, which, no shit. But if you're not going to take the time to do anything with him, it's not going to be anything clever or interesting. It's super weird considering that villains like Death's Head and Frau Engel are treated with much more respect. They're genuinely threatening and allowed to be scary. They're not cartoon characters. They're actual threats in the story. Hitler, on the other hand, feels like they did whatever they could to make him not threatening. The scene's just an overly long SNL skit from beginning to end, with Blasco forgetting his lines, Hitler doing his weird antics, and even a section where you kill a Nazi officer for reals to roaring applause.
Is that what you wanted? Is that what you had in mind? You Nazi asshole. Because that's all you're getting.
Wunderbar! Haben Sie das gesehen, Helene? Wie geboren für die Rolle. Er wird mein Platzkommando.
This is a word-for-word reference to a Tool song, so it's not all bad.
They even blow Reagan's brains out for a bit.
I loved it, Mr. Hitler. Super good.
Mr. Hitler, wenn Sie mich ansprechen, sagen Sie mein Führer.
Verstanden? Haben Sie keinen Respekt vor Autorität? Ihre Worte gewähren Einblick in einen höchst verräterischen Geist. I am so sorry, mein Führer. Sind Sie denn ein Idiot? No, mein Führer. Sind Sie ein verkleideter Schurke, ein Jude? Ein verräterischer Jude? No, mein Führer. I'm from Arizona.
Life and death is treated as a joke, which is something New Order or Old Blood would have never done, even if it was against the Nazis. The game emphasized the weight of the situation. If someone dies, shit has hit the fan. Even when you kill Rudy's dog in Old Blood, it's treated as a heavy plot point, as it was BJ getting revenge for a friend that was tortured to death, and it causes Rudy to form a vendetta against him that leads to a later boss fight. New Colossus treats death as a joke constantly. You have joke scenes where Nazis die in weird ways, characters killing Nazis in weird moments. Even when Super Sesh dies, it's kinda meant to be a funny bit, since his plan was to break you out of jail, and then it's immediately snuffed out from Engel shooting him in the head. If you start with New Colossus, nothing about this is gonna seem weird, you're just gonna assume it's a black comedy, but coming from New Order and Old Blood to this feels like a completely different team made the game. The frustrating part about this is you see the potential each scene has if they just knocked this shit off. The Hitler scene could have worked if they just hit the brakes instead of doing the 2 minutes hate shit, where they need you to understand how much they think Hitler's a stinky loser. They could have let him be menacing, even as an old man. Imagine if Hitler came in completely silent. He's in a wheelchair, maybe sucking on an oxygen mask. He's super old and you're led to believe he's just a feeble bag of bones. Then the first actor death happens. It's not a joke, it's not played for laughs, the whole room goes silent and you just see Hitler gesture for the next one to start. He's not ranting and raving, he's not pissing himself, he takes complete control of the room without saying a word. Would it have been funny? No, but it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be intense. You're genuinely scared of what this little old man is capable of doing to Blasco, a significantly stronger man who should be able to take him down. There's elements to Hitler's character in this I do like. For one, he's an egomaniac desperate for his art to be appreciated by the masses. He personally writes the Terror-Billy movie, and you find correspondence between him and Frau Engel, where he slowly takes more and more credit for the capture, up until he starts claiming he personally captured Blaskovich himself, cutting Engel out of it entirely. It's a fun idea that doesn't feel like an attempt at a joke. It is a joke, but it feels natural, instead of forcing the punchline down your throat. But this game is desperate for you to understand how much the developers don't like Hitler, so he can't be a character or anyone with actual history. He's just ranting words of the developers that we're forced to listen to. BJ's father is another moment where any form of subtlety would have taken it miles ahead of what we got in the game. Instead of making him Uncle Ruckus's spirit animal, how about you let the guy be an actual human being? I mentioned that there were moments that showed there was something more to the guy that probably was cut when the restructure probably happened, particularly the pocket knife scene and the basement scene. You get these flashbacks to BJ when he was a kid. The pocket knife scene is when he comes home after a group of bullies beat him up and took his pocket knife from him. He asks his mom and dad for help, and his father's insulted at the idea Blasco would come to them instead of fighting his own battles, telling BJ he needs to grow stronger on his own instead of relying on others. The basement scene is another flashback. BJ suffered nightmares as a kid and would dream about a monster in the basement coming to get him, something Old Blood hinted at, implying that the monster was his dad who would beat him. His father decided to take BJ down there along with his wife to hunt down the monster, each one holding a weapon. A lot of people admit this was a nice moment, that even if BJ's dad was Satan incarnate, he did genuinely love his son at one point. Personally, I think these scenes show that there was a deeper plan for his dad that was cut, that his dad would have been more of a human until they decided to make him over-the-top strawman. A major theme of the game is abuse. You see it all over the place, and it makes sense for a dystopia. From Engel abusing Segun, Grace abusing Segun, the Nazis abusing America, Hitler abusing the actors, Super Sesh abusing my patients. There's an effort to compare oppression with abuse, which makes sense, that works. Especially since a large part of the story is the fact Blasco is about to become a father and is scared for the future of his children. He wants to confront his past and move on, so he can become the father he needs to be when the twins are born. I'm fine with his father being abusive. It's something Old Blood hinted at. The problem is they make it so cartoonish, I genuinely wonder how this guy wasn't shot even before the Nazis showed up. I fully think the original idea for his dad would have been that he was abusive, yes, but he didn't believe that's what he was doing. Rip was just raising BJ the same way he was. A classic pull yourself up by the bootstrap style of parenting older generations lived with, but his father turned it into a pathology. He hit BJ over the pocket knife incident because he thought that's what would have gotten his son to toughen up and face his bullies. I'm even okay with the idea of him being angry over BJ's friendship with a black girl, so long as they used it to show that deep down Rip was a coward. If we're going off the idea Rip did mean well in his abuse, we could have seen his fears that his son befriending a black girl as leading to more bullying, something he would want to crack down on as soon as possible. You would have seen a new layer to the guy that despite his insistence on Blasco toughening up, he himself was terrified and projected his fears onto his son, something that does happen in abuse cases, of the parent forcing impossible standards onto the child due to their own insecurities. Imagine how that reunion scene could have gone if they did this. Blasco coming in expecting to run into the titan he always feared, and just sees this tired old man. Maybe he was still successful, sure, but he was not happy by any means. For all of his talk of being a man, standing up for yourself, the lessons he tried to literally beat into his son, he himself crumbled in the face of the Nazis. Maybe instead of selling his wife, she was taken by force. Rip couldn't protect her, and is left with essentially a hollow castle. He's rich, he's successful, but he knows this is all wrong, and there's no life worth living without his family, the thing he took for granted until it was too late. Blasco goes in expecting to fight a monster, and is hit with how small and pathetic his dad truly was. Something that could have been accentuated by the Hitler scene later if we take the hypothetical here. Blasco assumes it's going to be the same case, then you find out Hitler still had some more fight in him. Hell, maybe instead of Blasco killing his father, they could have bonded, spent an actual moment together and tried to reconcile just for him to be killed when Frau Engel assaults the house, showing that the pure evil like Engel crush even the small chances at redemption others might want to have, differentiating between the truly cruel and vicious and those that feel like they don't have a choice. It's something that basically comes down to write a fucking story. So I'm fully aware this is all pointless. Still, you can see how much better the game could have been if it just shut the fuck up. If it stopped worrying about being on the cutting edge and current thing and just wrote a story about people like the previous games. It feels so rushed and half-assed to the point that you don't even kill Frau Engel in a boss fight. It's a cutscene. New Order had a final boss fight. Old Blood had a final boss fight. Whether or not they were good is up to you, but the point is they weren't ashamed of video game elements and embraced them. New Colossus just couldn't bother and just shoves you into a cutscene takedown, which is such a letdown considering how much they build up Frau Engel. Let us fight her. She earned it. Hell, they introduced fucking Adolf Hitler and don't let us kill him. What's the point of that? At least let us shoot him or chop him up if you're gonna put Hitler in a Wolfenstein game. Once again, it feels like cut content, that we'd kill Frau Engel just for Hitler to take her place and be the final boss, which would make sense because it's the same progression from New Order and Old Blood. You kill Rudy, he's replaced by Helga. You kill her, she's replaced by Death's Head. You kill Death's Head, he's replaced by Frau Engel. You kill Frau Engel, she's replaced by Hitler. The monster always sheds its skin, word for word from Old Blood.
The monster never dies, no matter how many times you kill it. It just sheds its skin and changes form.
But this just isn't what happens. Instead, the game slams to the end credits as soon as Engel is dead, with Blasco and his team delivering a message to America, and it works. You get an end credits montage of a bunch of riots with some interesting imagery. One might even say politically motivated imagery. And honestly, this really puts a lot of elements of the game into perspective, from Grace and her Black Panther resistance groups, Black Panther famously being a Marxist terror organization, and Horton. I mentioned that he felt weird. When you first met him, you're under the impression he was the Louisiana preacher that runs his group out of what's left of New Orleans, but it's revealed that he's the socialist that was spreading Soviet propaganda even before World War II. But this part of the character goes quiet pretty fast, and he goes back to just being a redneck in most every cutscene. The socialist part of Horton feels like legitimate pandering, a wink and a nudge to appeal to the left side of the political aisle. It really feels like the original idea was that he would have been an actual preacher, since they had to explain that he was only wearing the cloth when you meet him because he found it, even though he's delivering a sermon as he shoots Nazis when you first meet him. The only thing to assume is that the restructure that more than likely probably hypothetically happened, not making any solid accusations here, made them go back and quickly turn him into a socialist instead of a preacher. Because not like New Order shied away from spirituality, the Tekla debate specifically revolved around spiritualism and deterministic mathematics. Set Roth is openly Jewish, and the point of his organization was to understand the nature of God by advancing science. Not to disprove God, but to understand his laws and the beauty of creation. You even have this exchange in the death camp.
Woman, I know well. Resilient, the will of iron, the family gone, all of them yet. Faith kept her going. I cannot believe it's that certainty. For me, in everything, there must be doubt. Otherwise, there's no room to question the plan. And, this place, this is the fruit of unquestioned, ferocious conviction. This is where absolute certainty leads.
Yet you are a believer.
I often wonder what kind of a God would sanction suffering such as this, and I question myself whether my faith is misplaced.
Maybe he's testing us.
Well, Egyptian, if he is testing us, we are failing gloriously.
Neither side really goes fuck God for letting the Nazis win or anything like that, instead assuming that it was a human failure in the face of a grand test. New Order, to put it bluntly, was never Reddit, and really New Colossus changing a preacher to be an avowed socialist makes a bit too much sense when you realize that the opiate of the masses changed hands, from the Bible to Das Kapital. He's still a preacher, just a current thing preacher. Regardless, as you can see, I have some opinions on New Colossus. It's got issues, a few flaws that are not great. Yeah, the game's annoying. It's something where it feels like a game quickly grafted on the Wolfenstein. For the sake of what? To appeal to a political group that aged like shit? Hell, they made a point that Blasco was the son of a Jewish woman, which for 2016 might have been some beat-the-fuck-out chud move, but 2024 would probably get machine games flooded with free Palestine posts from the exact people they wanted to shill to. There's a reason why chasing politics is a bad idea for media, because it is doomed to age horribly. Don't believe me? The TED Show came out earlier this year, a funny enough comedy that was well received by audiences.
Oh, last year we had an Indian kid.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, but they got him.
Except for one episode, the obligatory Seth MacFarlane politics episode, where the Republican strawman character is beat down by facts and logic by the lesbian minority girl, and her gotcha against him, she voted for Bill Clinton.
This is why, Dennis! But I voted for Clinton.
Yeah, this came out a week after it was revealed Bill Clinton was closely associated with Jeffrey Epstein and went to the infamous sex island dozens of times. Yeah, it's just the fate of media that wants to be political. You are dooming yourself to become a parody 20 years down the line for the sake of looking smart today. It's not a good idea, and very rarely will it work out in your favor. New Colossus screams that over and over again, but Youngblood... oh boy. Youngblood is the last stop on our journey, a game that really sealed the fate of this Reboot trilogy. New Colossus was divisive to say the least. Youngblood was universally hated. It was such an obvious cash-in for the IP and was blatantly a contract job. It's an agonizing game from every angle. The gameplay is pure grind, giving enemies health bars and levels that force you to grind missions over and over again. And the story is non-existent, just throwing you into repetitive missions one after the other until you're suddenly given the end of the game. And what makes it all worse is that none of the cast is likable anymore. There's not any grand villain to hate or any person in the cast you want to see win. The focus is moved off Blazkowicz to his daughters, Jessica and Sophia. It's been 20 years since the events of New Colossus, and America is more or less liberated from the Nazis. BJ and Anya were able to retire from the fight and raise their children in relative happiness. One day, Blasco goes missing, and his daughters assume he must have went to Nazi-occupied France to finish the fight there, so they follow along and get dragged into the remaining war. On paper, the concept isn't awful. The games were setting it up ever since New Order. The problem is, nobody in the game talks or acts like a human being. This is something where if someone told me Sweet Baby wrote the script, I would take their word at face value. It reeks of modern writing tropes, from characters who seem allergic to taking anything seriously, to complete cliches you're expected to pretend to have depth, and horrible attempts at humor. The most infamous being when the daughters kill a Nazi for the first time, and there's this extended scene of them freaking out and puking. It's not great. The problem with this game is that at every single level it's just unpleasant. It's not fun to play, it's a grindy slog. The story is not interesting, it feels beyond hollow and just an excuse to put you into the same grindy missions. The characters aren't fun, they feel like corporate-approved modern heroes, MCU-isms and all. The gameplay is not engaging. Sure, you have co-op now, but you need to play co-op because your partner AI is brain dead, useless at best, and outright harmful at worst. If you want to know how bad it gets, the ending just straight up talks about alternate dimensions. That Man in the High Castle influence goes into overdrive to the point you can see how they're prepping another reboot now that the trilogy fell apart. Yeah. Also, once again, you don't even get to see Hitler die. Blazkowicz killed him off screen, and now he's going across the multiverse killing every form of Hitler and all that shit there. It's dumb. It's really, really dumb. In a way, the ending is just a carbon copy of New Colossus, another call to arms to fight off what's left of the Nazis, which doesn't feel substantial because they're already on the back foot. I mean, it didn't feel that important in New Colossus anyway, but at least there you could see it as them starting the revolution in America. The whole plot relies on a Hail Mary from Hitler to essentially burn the world down as one last act of petty revenge, which, that works well enough. At least for the concept, not the actual how they did it. Hell, if you thought New Colossus was short, then this game will pass by in a blink of an eye. There's 6 main missions. 6. There's a reason there's so much of a grind in the game, it's because it has to pad out a very short story as long as they can. The worst part is that this was made in collaboration with Arcane Studios, so there was potential here. You could have had Wolfenstein-style gameplay mixed with immersive sim elements. That would fit with this concept. You're not playing Blazkowicz anymore and have to approach things differently. But Prey, this is not. It's just a modern Skinnerbox bullshit type game to trick you into dumping hours into this by artificially limiting progression. Why is there a level up system in fucking Wolfenstein? They don't even have Nick Gordon for the soundtrack. 0 out of 10. Irredeemable game. This game was a complete mistake. Something that even Bethesda might have realized, since beyond a VR game that came out that same year, the franchise has went a tad cold. This was all the way back in 2019, and we haven't heard a peep from Wolfenstein since. The most we know is that Machine Games is working on that new Indiana Jones thing, which I'm going to skip out on since I really don't like the direction this company's went in the last several years. Also, Indiana Jones going to be played by Troy Baker. Fucking no, screw that. I should have given it to the guys who made Terminator Resistance and RoboCop Rogue City. They would have done a good Indiana Jones game. But still, that's all I can say about the Wolfenstein trilogy. It's legitimately a tragedy. New Order and Old Blood were fantastic, some of the best modern shooters that have come out in a very long time. But the AAA obsession with the current thing bullshit strangled this in the crib, spending so long desperately trying to be in the public eye that it just became a big joke. They wanted to have their cake and eat it too, to get involved with modern politics and sell a product to the masses. And as we've seen countless times, that's just not what happens. I guarantee the exact crowd this company wanted to shill to will gun for them in due time. It's the nature of politics. Today's friends could be tomorrow's enemies. Metal Gear Solid 3 remains correct even after all this time. And really, what do they actually say with any of this? Hitler and the Nazis were bad? Real biting satire there. Regardless, I still recommend you guys sit through New Order and Old Blood. They are fantastic video games you won't regret. The ending of New Order is solid enough that you can just end things there if you want. If you really need to check out the rest of the trilogy, all I can say is get the rest of the games cheap. They are not worth full price by any means. Or hell, pirate them if you can. The Youngblood has a lot of online elements that make that a pain to hassle with. Point is, Wolfenstein will serve as a great example of a game series killed by the obsession over mainstream politics. You can't just make a video game to entertain people, it needs to be a fight. There needs to be conflict so only the right fans enjoy it, which is just a tiring way of viewing the world. Everyone is so hyper-aware of each other and desperate for blood that nothing is sacred. Entertainment isn't entertainment, it's a war of ideology. Fuck that shit, I say. And Machine Games seem like they might be on the chopping block like a lot of other studios at the moment. We lost Tango Games, which was a tragedy, even when the Arcane offices died. So a studio that hasn't made anything in 5 years, and their only upcoming title is some licensed Indiana Jones thing? Yeah, I got bad vibes for these dudes. They might want to start putting their resume out there, you know? Nevertheless, that's all I'm going to say about this series. This video ended up being a lot bigger than I anticipated, but fuck it. This was a project I've sat on for a while, and it's one I've wanted to do, because I truly love New Order and Old Blood, and the way this franchise was trashed is sad. Hopefully things can come back to sanity and we can see Wolfenstein come back to greatness, without political commentary, preferably. Really, the lesson at the end of the day is go play Freedom Fighters. It's on sale on Steam right now. But still, that's all I have to say. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
You're clear.
An old woman gave us shelter, kept us hidden in the garret. Then the soldiers came. She died without a whisper. There were 3 of us this morning. I'm the only one this evening, but I must go on. The frontiers are my prison. Oh, the wind is blowing through the graves. The wind is blowing. Freedom soon will come. Then will come from the shadows. Oh, the wind is blowing through the graves. The wind is blowing. Freedom soon will come. Then will come from the shadows.
Hey, loser, do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.